They had 3 guns. She had empty hands and running clothes. They thought that was enough. It wasn't. On a quiet street in Briarwood Heights, 3 men stepped out of a black sedan and surrounded a woman jogging alone at dusk. They showed her photographs. They made demands. They were certain, absolutely certain, that she would fold. She didn't fold. Within 90 seconds, 1 man was on the ground, 1 was bleeding, and the 3rd was driving away with his hands, shaking on the wheel. They had spent weeks watching the wrong woman, and they had no idea how wrong they were. If you haven't subscribed to this channel yet, now is the time. Hit that button and stay with us until the very last second of this story, because what happens next will hit harder than you expect. Drop a like and tell me in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The run was supposed to clear her head. That was the whole point of it. 40 minutes through Briarwood Heights, while the day bled out and the streetlights flickered on one by one, the kind of mindless physical repetition that let her brain decompress without actually shutting down. Mara Voss had been doing it 3 times a week for the past 8 months, the same route, give or take a block, same gray hoodie, same worn Saucony trainers with the fraying left lace she kept meaning to replace. She looked like someone's older sister, someone's tired neighbor who worked too much and slept too little. The kind of woman nobody looked at twice. That was not an accident. She turned left off Garrison Avenue and started up the long incline of Mercer Street, her breathing measured and controlled, her eyes doing the thing they always did, moving, cataloging, filing. A woman walking a terrier, a teenager on a skateboard, grinding a curb he hadn't landed yet. 2 cars parked with nobody in them. 1 car running with someone in it. Mara's stride didn't change. Her breathing didn't change. But something behind her eyes sharpened the way a lens sharpens when you twist the focus ring. Black sedan. Driver's side window cracked an inch. Engine idling. No headlights, which made no sense because dusk had thickened enough to warrant them. The plate was local, but the registration sticker was angled wrong. Not the way people normally stuck them, but the way people stuck them when they'd peeled it off something else. She noted it, filed it, kept running. She turned right on Callaway without breaking pace, taking a route she almost never took. The variation was deliberate. If the sedan followed, it wasn't coincidence. If it didn't, she was being paranoid. And paranoia was a tax she'd always been willing to pay. 40 seconds later, headlights appeared in her peripheral vision. The sedan turned onto Callaway. Mara kept her face forward and let the cold air fill her lungs. Her heart rate ticked up, but not from exertion. 8 months of grocery runs and morning coffee and quarterly security briefings that barely required her full attention. And now this, whatever this was, sliding up behind her on a Tuesday evening like something she'd walked away from had followed her home. Maybe it had. She turned again, this time onto Birch Lane, a narrower residential street with better cover and worse sightlines for anyone trying to approach from a vehicle. She was mapping it as she ran the gap between the parked Honda and the pickup truck, the low fence on the left, the driveway with the pickup pointing outward for a fast reversal if she needed it. Old habits. They never fully died, no matter how long you starved them. The sedan didn't follow her onto Birch Lane. Instead, it beat her to the other end. She came around the corner and stopped. 3 men stood in the middle of the street. They'd parked diagonally to cut off the road and positioned themselves in a loose triangle, one in front, 2 flanking. 2 flanking, the kind of spacing that told her immediately they weren't amateurs. Amateurs bunched together. These 3 had left enough distance between themselves to avoid getting tangled, enough angle, to make sure she couldn't run between them. Mara stopped Voss running. She stood with her hands at her sides and her breathing still controlled and looked at them the way a person looks at a math problem. They're pretty sure they already know the answer to. The one in front was the tallest, broad through the shoulders, maybe 40, with a jaw that looked like it had been used as a wall a few times. He wore a dark jacket over what was probably a shoulder holster. She could see the slight asymmetry in the way the fabric fell. The two on the flanks were younger. The one on her left kept his right hand close to his hip. The one on her right was doing the thing rookies do when they're trying not to look nervous, which is look slightly too relaxed. "Ms. Voss," the tall one said. "Not a question. You've been following me for 2 blocks, she said. "You could have just used the phone." He didn't smile. He reached into his jacket, slowly, deliberately, the kind of gesture meant to demonstrate control, and produced a manila envelope. He held it out, and when she didn't move, he opened it himself and turned it toward her. Photographs. Her at the coffee shop on Delancey Street. Her outside the Northstar infrastructure offices downtown. Her in the parking structure of her building at 6 in the morning. Her running. This route. Last Thursday. 3 weeks, he said. "We've been watching for 3 weeks. Mara looked at the photographs for a long moment. She looked at them the way you look at something that confirms what you suspected, but still feels colder than you expected when it arrives. "Okay," she said. "You're scheduled to sign a contract with Northstar Infrastructure on Friday." The tall one continued. "Security consulting? International. You know the one we mean." "I know the one. You're going to call them tomorrow morning and tell them you're not available. You're going to cite personal reasons. You're going to be professional about it, and they won't push back too hard because they never do when the money isn't moving yet." He paused. "And that'll be the end of it." Mara looked at him steadily. The evening was cold enough that she could see her breath, small white clouds dispersing in the still air. She thought about the Northstar contract, 3 months of preliminary vetting, 2 rounds of security clearance review, 1 very long dinner with the regional director, where he'd explained exactly what they were protecting and why they needed someone who understood threat environments that weren't domestic. She thought about the facilities, the people who worked in them, the reports she'd read about what happened to the consultants who'd come before her. "No," she said. The tall man tilted his head slightly. "I'm sorry? No," she said again. "I'm not going to do that." Something changed in his expression. Not surprise exactly. More like the recalibration of someone who expected a door to open and instead found a wall. His jaw tightened. The 2 flankers shifted their weight. "Miss Voss," he said, and his voice had dropped a register. "You should think carefully." I thought carefully. "The answer is no." The tall man looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded, and the warmth left his face completely, and he said, "Take her." The left flanker moved first. He came in fast with his hands out a grab, both arms, the kind of move designed to control and overwhelm. It was a reasonable move against most people. Against Mara Voss, it was the equivalent of reaching into a box you thought was empty and finding something with teeth. She pivoted left into him instead of away from him, closed the distance before he expected it, and got inside his reach. Her left hand clamped his right wrist. Her right forearm drove up under his elbow, and she torqued her entire body in a single sharp rotation. The joint flexion happened fast. He didn't have time to resist it. His knees went soft, and he dropped. Not all the way down, but enough. One knee on the asphalt, and his face pulled into a grimace, and for 2 seconds, everyone on the street stopped moving. The right flanker stood with his hand halfway to his hip. The tall man stood with his jaw slightly open. Mara released the wrist and stepped back and raised her hands, palms out, the universal signal that she was not escalating. "I'd prefer," she said evenly, "if we didn't do the rest of this." The tall man's jaw closed. His hand moved. The pistol came out of the shoulder holster, clean, practiced, no hesitation. A Glock. She registered automatically. Polymer frame, rail attachment, with no light currently mounted. He brought it up to chest height and pointed it at her. "Last chance," he said. From behind the sedan, a 4th man appeared. He'd been in the back seat, she realized, and she'd miscounted, which was a mistake she was going to be annoyed about later. He had a compact submachine gun on a sling, and he moved to her right side, cutting off the angle she'd been half-consciously building toward the fence. She raised her hands fully, shoulder height, palms flat. The math had changed. The tall man moved toward her slowly, the Glock still at chest height. The left flanker was back on both feet now, favoring his right arm, his expression somewhere between embarrassed and furious. The right flanker produced a set of zip-tie restraints professional grade, not the hardware store variety, and held them up. "Turn around," the tall man said, hands behind. Mara turned around slowly. She watched the sedan's rear window reflection. She watched the angles. The right flanker approached from her left, which was either careless or a test, and she decided it didn't matter which. She could feel the cold air on the back of her neck. She could hear the right flanker's footsteps on the asphalt. 4 steps. 3. 2. His hand closed around her left wrist, and Mara moved. She drove her left shoulder down and back, pulling him forward and off balance at the same moment, her right hand snapping across and grabbing his forearm as he stumbled. She pivoted hard, using his forward momentum, and planted him in front of her between herself and the Glock. The tall man pulled up short. He couldn't fire without hitting his own man. Half a second of chaos. She felt the right flanker's hip against hers, and found what she was looking for, the secondary, worn on the inside of the belt at the back, a snub-nosed revolver in a friction holster. Her right hand stripped it out before he'd even registered what she was reaching for. Then she broke left, hard and fast, running low, and put the rear panel of the nearest parked SUV between herself and the Glock as the tall man's shot went high. The rear window exploded inward. Glass rained across the pavement. She was already moving along the side of the vehicle, putting steel between herself and the shooter. Her breathing controlled and focused. 2 shots, 3. She could hear the caliber in the sound. 9mm, the patter of brass on asphalt. The 4th man with the submachine gun was repositioning. She could hear his footsteps. She came around the front of the SUV low and fast and found the tall man side on, his attention split between her last position and the driver's door. She fired once. The shot took him through the right thigh, and he went down hard, twisting, the Glock skidding across the pavement. The man with the submachine gun swung toward her, and she was already moving again, ducking back behind the SUV's engine block, and he fired a burst that chewed the front quarter panel but didn't find her. From somewhere behind her, tires screamed. The sedan reversed hard, the 4th man piling into the back seat, and it fish-tailed onto the street and accelerated north. The 2 flankers were already running. The one with the hurt arm going west, the other following the sedan on foot for half a block before disappearing between 2 houses. Silence, broken by the tall man on the pavement, breathing through his teeth, his hand clamped to his thigh. Mara stood in the middle of Birch Lane with the revolver at her side, smoke still curling from the barrel, and looked at the mess around her. Broken glass, brass casings, blood in a dark smear on the asphalt. The Glock 3 feet from the tall man's reaching hand. She walked over and kicked it further away. Then she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "I need police and EMS," she said when the dispatcher answered. "Birch Lane between Callaway and Marsh. I'm the woman in the gray hoodie. I've got a gunshot wound that isn't mine and an unauthorized weapon I need you to know about before your units arrive." She paused. "Tell them I'm going to be sitting in the middle of the street with my hands visible. I'd appreciate if they didn't shoot me." She hung up, walked to the center of the lane, and sat down cross-legged on the cold asphalt, with the revolver placed carefully in front of her, barrel pointed away. The tall man was watching her from the ground, with an expression that had moved past pain into something harder to name. "Who sent you?" she asked. He said, "Nothing." "You sin. You showed me surveillance photos. You knew my name. You knew about the Northstar contract." She looked at him steadily. "That's not a street crew. That's a funded operation. Which means whoever you're working for knew enough to find me, knew enough to watch me for 3 weeks, and still thought that she gestured at the surrounding wreckage was going to work. Still nothing. They underestimated me," she said. "Which means either they didn't do their research or they did it and didn't believe what they found. She tilted her head slightly. Which one is it? The tall man looked at her for a long moment. His face was pale now, the blood loss catching up. They said you'd been out a long time, he said finally. People go soft. Mara nodded slowly, as if he'd confirmed something she'd suspected. People do, she said. Sometimes. The first siren reached her 2 minutes later. Detective Caleb Rourke arrived at Birch Lane 11 minutes after the initial dispatch. He'd been 2 precincts over on something unrelated, caught the call on the radio, and made the decision to reroute that he couldn't entirely explain later, except to say that something in the dispatcher's phrasing, the woman in the gray hoodie, says she'll be sitting in the middle of the street with her hands. Visible had sounded like something worth seeing in person. He was right. She was exactly where she said she'd be. Sitting cross-legged on the asphalt, surrounded by broken glass and bullet casings, the revolver placed precisely in front of her like an exhibit at a crime scene, her hands palm up on her knees. No anxiety in her posture, no visible distress, just waiting, with the specific quality of patience that belongs to people who are very comfortable being uncomfortable. Rourke badged the uniforms at the perimeter and walked toward her. Ms. Voss, detective. She looked up at him, mid-30s, brown eyes, a small cut above her left ear from the glass that she either hadn't noticed or hadn't bothered to deal with. That's a 6-shot revolver. I fired 1 round, 5 remaining. I kept it pointed at the ground after the shooter fled, and I haven't touched it since I set it down. My fingerprints are on the grip. Rourke looked at the revolver, then back at her. That's a very thorough opening statement, he said. I figured it would save time. How are you so calm right now? I've had worse evenings, she said. He had her stand slowly, letting the uniforms do their sweep, and then walked her to his car, where she sat in the open door and answered his questions with the precision of someone transcribing from memory rather than reconstructing from shock. Times, distances, position of each attacker at each moment, weapons description and caliber estimate based on sound signature, direction of flight, physical description of all 4 men, including the one she said she'd failed to spot until he appeared from the sedan's rear door. You're listing your own mistake, Rourke said. Yes. Most witnesses don't do that. I'm not most witnesses. He watched her for a moment. There was something about the way she described spatial positions. The second flanker had approximately 8 feet of clearance on my right before I pivoted, which closed to roughly 4 feet when I used the first man as a shield. That was setting off something in the back of his professional brain. What do you do for work, Ms. Voss? Risk analysis. Private sector. What kind of risk analysis requires knowing the difference between 9mm and 0.38 by sound signature? She looked at him calmly, the interesting kind. Rourke excused himself and walked back to his car. He ran her name through NCIC. The return came back fast. No criminal record, no outstanding warrants. A concealed carry permit issued 3 years ago. Normal, clean, boring. Then he ran her deeper, not because he suspected her of anything, but because something was nagging at him in the professional equivalent of an itch he couldn't locate. The second return took longer, and when it came back, his phone screen displayed a clearance block, Federal S notification, that told him the information existed, but that his current authorization level wasn't sufficient to see most of it. What he could seize were 2 things: a military service code that corresponded to a special operations branch, and a restriction flag that the database helpfully described as information pertaining to the named individual subject to compartmentalized access protocols, authorized personnel only. Rourke stood next to his car for a moment in the cold evening air. Then he walked back to where she was sitting. Miss Voss, he said, I think we need to have a different conversation. She looked at him. Something in her expression shifted. Not surprise, not nervousness. More like acknowledgement, like a door she'd been leaning against had finally been pushed from the other side. How much did you pull? She asked quietly. Enough to know I didn't pull much. She nodded, looked at the street, looked at the EMS team working on the tall man 40 feet away who was conscious and refusing to answer questions and would make it to the hospital just fine. They told me people go soft, she said, more to herself than to him. Who did? The man on the ground. She was quiet for a moment. He wasn't wrong that people do. He was just wrong about me specifically. Rourke watched her. What did they want? They wanted me to walk away from a contract. She paused. I'm not going to do that. He should have pushed harder. He knew that later. He should have pulled her into a formal interview room and spent 3 hours running down every detail, should have flagged her file to the federal liaison, and waited for someone with higher clearance to come explain what he was looking at. Instead, he gave her his card and told her not to leave the city and watched her walk away down Birch Lane with her hands in her hoodie pocket and her shoes crunching over broken glass. He stood there until she turned the corner. The tall man in the ambulance never gave a name. His prints came back to a clean identity with no real history behind it, the kind of construction that cost real money and required real infrastructure. The sedan's plates came back to a car that had been reported stolen in Delaware 6 weeks earlier. The submachine gun, recovered 2 blocks away where the fourth man had apparently ditched it while running, was a modified variant that had been reported seized in a federal weapons case 2 years prior and then somehow lost in the evidentiary chain. None of it was amateur work. Whatever Mara Voss had walked into on Birch Lane, Rourke decided, was considerably larger than a street-level intimidation. She called Northstar the next morning. Not to cancel, to confirm. The regional director, a lean Midwesterner named Gerard Hulst, who wore his seriousness like a second suit, took her call from his corner office and listened without interrupting while she described the previous evening in the precise she'd used with Rourke. Minus the personal details she had no reason to share with a client. When she finished, there was a long pause on his end. Ms. Voss, he said carefully, that's the 3rd such incident involving people connected to this contract. She hadn't known that. She'd suspected it. The operation against her had been too well-resourced for a one-time attempt, but she hadn't known. Tell me, she said. Hulst told her. 2 previous security consultants who'd been approached before signing. One had walked away quietly. The other had tried to report the approach and been in a car accident 2 weeks later, non-fatal, but non-coincidental as far as anyone with functioning instincts could tell. A third had signed and gone to work, and lasted 11 days at the facility before disappearing. He'd turned up eventually, alive, but changed in the way that people are changed when something specific has been done to them. The facility is critical, Hulst said. Tier 1 energy infrastructure. The region can't function without it, and neither can we. But the network that's been pressuring us has connections that extend into local governance, which means standard protective contracts haven't been... Tell me about the facility, she said. He told her. She listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. I'll be there Friday, she said. Ms. Voss, given what happened last night. Friday, she said. Send me everything you have on the network. Not the summary, the raw files. Another pause. Then, all right. She spent Thursday in her apartment, reading everything Northstar sent. The network's name in the files was Vektara, criminal organization operating under the cover of several logistics companies across the region, with financial connections that snaked through 3 different countries and a documented history of using controlled violence to manage business environments. They had killed people. They had also corrupted people, which in some ways was more efficient and more dangerous. They had learned, somewhere along the line, that the most effective way to control critical infrastructure wasn't to own it. It was to make sure nobody capable of defending it was willing to stay. They had turned protection into a liability. Mara read the files until 2 in the morning. Then she went to sleep for 5 hours, woke up, ran 4 miles, and packed a bag. She called her sister before boarding the flight. A brief call deliberately vague, the kind she'd been making for years. Work trip, she said. How long? Not sure. Could be a while. Mara. Her sister's voice had the particular quality it got when she was trying to ask something she already suspected she wouldn't get a straight answer to. Is it dangerous? Mara looked out the airport window at the tarmac, gray sky, a ground crew in orange vests moving equipment with the specific efficiency of people who'd done it 10,000 times. I'll call when I get there, she said. She boarded the flight. The Northstar facility outside the city of Rannoch in the Western Territory of Valdora was a network of energy relay stations and processing infrastructure sprawling across 11 acres of elevated ground above a river valley. It should have been impressive. It was impressive. The engineering was sound, the equipment was well maintained, the physical plant was exactly what the documents described. The security was another matter. Mara arrived at dusk, a different dusk than Briarwood Heights, this one carrying the smell of pine and cold rock instead of exhaust and concrete, and stood at the main gate while the facility supervisor, a stocky man named Darvish Osei, looked at her with an expression that he was clearly trying to make neutral, but wasn't quite managing. Ms. Voss, he said. We were expecting someone else, she offered. Someone from the tactical division, he said carefully. She looked at him. She was in travel clothes, dark pants, a fleece boots with worn tread. She had one bag. She was aware, like someone who had arrived to attend a conference rather than assess a security environment. I'm the tactical division, she said. For now, walk me through. He walked her through. It was worse than the files had suggested. The perimeter camera system had 3 dead angles. She identified them within the first 10 minutes. The guard rotation had been reduced from 8-hour shifts to 12 because of staffing shortages, which meant the overnight crews were running on 4 hours of sleep and the kind of fatigue that made people miss things. The main generator backup had a fuel issue that would give them approximately 45 minutes of auxiliary power in an outage. The radio system was old. Not ancient, but old enough that it would struggle in the high elevation, dead zones around the facility's eastern perimeter. The guards themselves were a mixed picture. 7 of them, varying ages, all local hires. Most had some security background, former police, former military, one former park ranger who had the most tactically sound instincts of any of them. Several were scared, not of Mara, of the situation. They had seen what happened to consultants who came before, and they had reached the private conclusion that working at this facility was a death sentence applied slowly. She did not address that directly. Not yet. She spent the first 2 hours walking every inch of the perimeter. She climbed the observation posts. One was too exposed. Another had a structural issue in the platform deck that would fail under any significant load. She tested the radio at 4 different positions. She documented everything in a mental ledger that she would spend the first night converting into operational corrections. When she came back to the central operations room at 9 p.m., Osei was there with 2 of the senior guards, and the expression on his face had shifted from carefully neutral to something less careful. The Eastern camera array, he said. You noticed that? Hard to miss. We submitted the repair request 6 weeks ago. What happened to it? He looked at his hands briefly. It was approved, and then the technician who was supposed to come didn't come. We were told there was a scheduling conflict. We resubmitted. And? Same thing. She looked at him steadily. Someone is making sure your blind spots stay blind. He held her gaze. He was a careful man. She could see that careful the way people became when they'd learned that speaking plainly could get them into trouble. That's a significant thing to say, Ms. Voss. Yes, she said. It is, and it's accurate, which is why you haven't pressed harder on the repair request, and why 2 of your guards are thinking about resigning, and why whoever was here before me lasted 11 days. She paused. I'm not going to last 11 days. Osei looked at her. I'm going to fix the cameras tonight, she said. I need 2 people with ladders, a splice kit if you have one, and the layout of the conduit runs from the original installation plans. In the morning, I need everyone on shift together so I can walk them through changes to the rotation. I need someone to call the fuel depot and tell them we need a priority refill on the backup generator tank. I'll draft the language if you need it. And I need the radio log from the last 3 months. Silence now, she said quietly. O.C. looked at the 2 senior guards. One of them, the former park ranger, whose name was Tomas, and who had said nothing since she arrived and had simply watched, gave a small nod. I'll get the ladders, Tomas said. They worked through the night. By 2 in the morning, the Eastern camera array was back online. By 4, she had reconfigured the guard rotation into 6-hour intervals with built-in overlap at the perimeter positions. By 5:30, she had drafted a communications protocol that accounted for the radio dead zones and established manual checkpoint intervals to compensate. By 6 a.m., when the overnight shift was handing off to the morning crew, she was standing in the main operations room with a mug of terrible coffee that someone had made at some point and left on the counter, and she was looking at a map of the facility with colored markers, indicating every change she'd made and every change she intended to make before nightfall. O.C. came to stand beside her. He looked at the map for a long moment. "In one night," he said. "The problems weren't complicated," she said. "They were neglected. You slept? 2 hours." He was quiet for a moment. "Then, one of my guards asked me this morning who sent you." "Northstar sent me." He meant, O.C. paused, choosing his words. He meant, "Who are you really?" Because the woman who came through that gate last night didn't look like someone who fixes security systems. But the work you did doesn't look like a security consultant either. Mara looked at the map. "What does it look like?" O.C. considered this carefully. "It looks like someone who has been inside the wire before," he said. "A different kind of wire." She picked up her coffee. It was bad enough to be almost impressive. "Your guard who asked," she said. "What's his name?" "Benedict. Young. Smartest one I've got." "Tell Benedict to get some sleep before tonight's shift," she said. "And tell him that for right now, the only thing that matters about who I am is that I'm the person standing between this facility and whatever Vektara sends next." O.C. nodded slowly. "And when is that?" he asked. Mara looked at the Eastern camera feed, now live, now clear, showing the slope of the valley in the pale early light. 3 days, she said. Maybe 4. "You know that? Or you think that?" She turned to look at him directly. "I know it," she said. O.C. said nothing. He looked at the map, and then at her, and then back at the map. And something in his expression changed. Not completely, not all at once, but enough. Outside, the dawn was building over the valley. The mountains caught the light first, peaks going amber before the lower ground, the river below still in shadow. It was beautiful in the way that places are beautiful when they don't know what's coming. Mara finished her terrible coffee and picked up the radio. "All positions," she said into it, her voice flat and clear. "This is Voss. New authentication protocol starts now. Checkpoint call-out every 30 minutes. If I don't hear a call-out, I'm coming to find you. Acknowledge by position. Static." A pause that lasted long enough to make O.C. glance at her sideways. Then Tomas's voice, "East Post, acknowledged." Then another, "West Post, acknowledged." Then 3 more, in sequence, each one a small confirmation that something had shifted in the last 9 hours. Not trust exactly, not yet, but the first tentative movement toward it. She clipped the radio to her belt. She picked up the facility layout again. She started on the next problem. She was halfway through it when the perimeter sensor on the northern slope triggered an alert. Not an alarm, just an anomaly flag. Something the system had registered as worth noting. She looked at it for a moment. It was a vehicle. Stopped on the road above the facility. Parked, with no lights. Her jaw tightened just slightly. She keyed the radio. "Tomas," she said. "North Sector. You have eyes on the road above your position?" A pause. "I do now," Tomas said. And then after a moment, there's two of them. Two vehicles, not one. She looked at the sensor log. The first vehicle had stopped 8 minutes ago. She had been on the radio doing position checks and hadn't caught the alert in real time. 8 minutes was a long head start. 8 minutes was a long head start for people who knew what they were doing. Mara crossed the operations room in 4 strides and pulled up the northern slope camera, the one that had been dead 12 hours ago and was live now because she'd spent 2 hours on a ladder in the cold fixing it. The image was grainy in the early light, but clear enough. 2 vehicles on the service road above the facility, parked nose to tail with their lights off. Dark-colored, both of them. One appeared to be a truck with an extended cab. The other was harder to read from this angle-lower profile, possibly a van. "Tomas," she said into the radio, "don't move to a better position. Stay where you are and keep eyes on them, passively. Don't make it obvious you've seen them. Copy." A pause. "They're just sitting there. I know. That's the part that matters." She turned to Osi, who had moved to stand beside her without being asked. She was starting to appreciate that about him, the way he positioned himself where he could see rather than where he was comfortable. "How long has that road been used?" she asked. "It's a maintenance access road. Goes up to the relay towers on the ridge. We use it maybe twice a month." "Who else uses it?" He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. "Officially, no one. Unofficially." He looked at the screen. "There have been vehicles up there before. At night. We reported it twice. The third time, we stopped reporting it because nothing ever came of the first 2. She filed that. "How many approaches to this facility from that road?" "1 vehicle path. But on foot, you could come down the slope at maybe 3 or 4 different points. The terrain's rough but manageable. Fencing? Standard chain link on the upper perimeter. Not reinforced." She looked at the image again. The vehicles hadn't moved. The sky behind them was lightening. The sun was coming up behind the ridge and would clear it within the next 20 minutes, which would improve visibility on the slope, but also mean that anyone up there had a clear backlit view of the facility layout and the guard positions. "I need everyone on shift now," she said. "Not the overnight crew, let them sleep. They're burned out and useless to me tired. The morning shift plus whoever came in early. That's 4 people. 4 is what we have. Get them." Osisi went. Mara stayed at the screen and counted. 2 vehicles, unknown occupancy. Minimum 2 people per vehicle for a functional operation. More likely 3 or 4 in the truck. Call it 6 to 8, conservatively, against 4 guards plus herself. The facility had 2 hardened structures, the main operations building she was standing in and the primary relay station on the eastern end of the compound, and several outbuildings that were soft, meaning they would stop a body from being seen, but wouldn't stop a bullet or much else. The good news, such as it was, the attackers were visible. They had parked on a road, not approached through the terrain, which meant either they were scouting or they were waiting for something, or, and this was the possibility she liked least, they wanted to be seen. Wanted to sit up there long enough to make the people inside nervous, to let the fear do some of the work before they moved. Psychological pressure before physical pressure. Standard approach for an organization that had successfully driven out 2 previous consultants without firing a shot. She thought about the tall man on Birch Lane. "They said you'd been out a long time," said people go soft. She picked up the radio again. "Benedict." A pause, then a younger voice, slightly rougher, not yet fully awake. "Here, I thought you were sleeping. Couldn't. Fair enough. I need you in operations in 5 minutes." The morning shift assembled in the operations room. 7 minutes later, Tomas, who had come in from the east post and looked like a man conserving energy for something specific, Benedict, who was 26 and had the kind of watchful stillness that usually came from difficult experience. A woman named Priya, who ran the communications board and had civilian security training, but real attention to detail, and a thick-necked former police sergeant named Daku, who had been at the facility longer than anyone, and who had looked at Mara since her arrival, with an expression somewhere between skepticism and barely concealed resentment. She addressed Daku first, not because he was most important, but because his attitude was a problem she needed to manage before it became a liability. Daku, northern upper perimeter. What's the footing like on the slope inside the fence line? He blinked. He'd expected, she could tell, to be ignored. Rocky, loose shale in the upper third. Gets slippery when there's morning dew. Anybody who comes down that slope in a hurry is going to make noise. Probably. Good. That's your position. I need someone up there who won't slip and won't panic. Can you do that? He looked at her for a moment. The resentment didn't disappear exactly. It shifted, reorganized into something more functional. Yeah, he said. Take the long-range radio and check in every 15 minutes. If you see movement on the slope, you don't engage. You report and fall back to the main building. You understand me? You don't try to stop them. You report. I've been a cop for... I know what you've been, she said, not unkindly. And I need that experience watching the approach, not engaged in a firefight on bad footing in the dark. Is that clear? A beat. Clear, she turned to Tomas. You're with me on the main gate. We're going to look very visible and very calm, which means standing where they can see us from the road without using optics. She looked at Priya. I need you on the comms board. If I call in, you respond. If I don't call in on schedule, you get OSE, and you get Northstar's emergency line. And you keep trying both until someone answers. I'm going to give you a call schedule. Understood. She turned to Benedict last. He was watching her with that careful stillness, his hands loose at his sides. You said you couldn't sleep, she said. Correct. Why? He considered this. Because those vehicles were up there before I came in, and I didn't know if anyone else had seen them, and I kept thinking about what happens if they haven't. She nodded. Good instinct. You're on the secondary position, the relay station on the east end. I want eyes on the fence line from that angle. If this is a feint and the real approach is from the east while we're watching the north, you're the person who catches it. And if it's not a feint, then you hold the relay station. That's the critical infrastructure. If we lose it, we lose the whole facility's function, which is what they actually want. You do not leave that position unless the building is physically on fire. Understood. He paused. What are you expecting them to do? It was a good question. She'd been rolling it over since the sensor alert. I think they're watching us watch them, she said. They want to see how we respond, whether we run, whether we panic, whether somebody makes a call to Northstar and then stands by a window looking scared. She looked at each of them in turn. We're going to do none of those things. We're going to go about our shift visibly and let them see that their being up there hasn't changed anything. Can you all do that? Tomas said yes. Daku said yes. Benedict said nothing, but nodded once, which she was already learning to read as his version of yes. Priya was already writing down the call schedule Mara had given her. They dispersed. The vehicles stayed on the Ridge Road for 3 hours and 40 minutes. Farah spent most of that time at the main gate with Tomas, doing exactly what she'd said, being visible, being calm, doing the procedural work of a security shift. She walked the perimeter at the 2-hour mark, taking her time, not hurrying, making sure that anyone watching through optics from the road above would see someone who was entirely unimpressed by their presence. Tomas fell into step beside her without being asked. You ever deal with this kind before? He said. It wasn't really a question. More like him thinking out loud. What kind? The kind that operate like a business. Like there's a plan and a budget and a chain of command and they're following procedure. He kicked a loose stone off the path. It's different than someone's angry or desperate. Makes it harder to predict. Usually, she agreed. The consultant before you. Vasek. He was a good man. She glanced at him. What happened to him? Tomas was quiet for a moment. He laughed. 11 days, like Hulse told you. But the thing Hulse didn't mention is that for the first 6 of those days, Vasek was doing well. really well. He'd made changes. Good ones. Some of them overlap with what you did last night. And then something changed. I don't know what. He stopped sleeping. Started checking the perimeter every hour instead of every 30 minutes, which sounds more thorough, but actually just meant he was running himself into the ground. By day 9, he couldn't make decisions faster than a minute apiece. By day 11, he stopped. By day 11, he was gone. Yes. Mara looked at the fence line. The morning light had fully arrived, and the valley below was green and clear, genuinely beautiful in the way of places that had existed long before anyone decided to put infrastructure on them. He was good, but he was alone, she said. Tomas looked at her. A person can sustain a high-threat environment for a limited time before the vigilance itself becomes the thing that breaks them, she said. It's not a weakness, it's physiology. The only way to sustain it is to distribute it. Make sure no one person is carrying the whole weight of the watch. She paused. That's what the rotation changes are for. Not just coverage. Distribution. Tomas was quiet for a moment. You sound like you know that from the inside. She didn't answer. He didn't push. They finished the perimeter walk and came back to the gate. The vehicles were still up on the road. Mara checked the time. 2 hours 40 minutes now, her radio clicked. Daku's voice. North position. Nothing moving. They haven't left the vehicles as far as I can see. Copy. Stay put. Another click. Benedict, east position clear. Copy. She looked up at the ridge. The angle of the light had shifted enough now that she could see glints from the road reflective glass, probably binoculars or a spotting scope. Someone was watching her. Watch them. They're going to leave soon, she said. Tomas looked at her. How do you know? Because they've been up there long enough to count us. They know how many people are on shift. They know our positions. They have what they came for. She watched the glint of the optics. The vehicles are for show. The information is what matters. 20 minutes later, both vehicles started their engines and drove back up the service road toward the ridge. Mara watched them go. That's the reconnaissance, she said quietly. The attack comes next. Northstar's regional director, Gerard Halst, called at 11 that morning. Mara took the call in the operations room, standing at the map she'd covered in markers, with Ose in the chair behind her listening and making no pretense of not listening. The surveillance vehicles concern us, Halst said. They should. We're looking at expediting the tactical team deployment. We have a 6-person unit that could be on site in minus. How long, she asked. A pause. 72 hours. Maybe 60 if we push. She looked at the map. 3 days. The reconnaissance had been this morning. 3 days was a reasonable attack window, but it assumed Vektara was operating on Northstar's timeline, which was an assumption nobody should be making. What's the status on the backup generator fuel? She asked. I've been told the depot request was submitted yesterday morning. I need an answer on the delivery, not the submission. Another pause, this one longer. The pause of a man navigating between what he'd been told and what he was being asked to account for. I'll get you a direct answer in the next 2 hours. I also need the personnel files for the facility's vendor contracts. Maintenance, fuel, communications equipment. Anyone who's had access in the last 6 months. That's a significant data pull. Yes. What are you looking for? She thought about Tomas, telling her that the Eastern Camera repair request had been submitted twice, and approved twice, and the technician had never come. She thought about the fuel delivery that always seemed to be slightly late. She thought about a radio log she'd spent an hour reviewing last night, looking at the dead zones on the eastern perimeter that had been documented and submitted for infrastructure upgrade 8 months ago, and then not upgraded. Someone in the vendor chain is feeding Vektara information, she said. Probably not intentionally, probably just someone who's been paid to delay or redirect service requests. But someone is making sure this facility stays just vulnerable enough to be manageable. Silence on Halst's end. That's a serious accusation, he said. It's an observation. Send me the files. He sent them by 2 p.m. She spent 3 hours going through them, sitting at the operations table with a cold cup of coffee at her elbow and the kind of focused attention that tended to make the people around her slightly uncomfortable, because it looked, from the outside, like she'd gone somewhere inside herself and wasn't quite reachable. She found it in the maintenance log. A technician named Soros contracted through a third-party services firm who had been assigned to 3 separate repair jobs at the facility in the past 4 months and had completed 0 of them. Each time, the paperwork showed a completed site visit. The invoice had been paid, but the work hadn't been done, and when Mara cross-referenced the incomplete repairs against the facility's current vulnerabilities, she found a pattern so consistent it couldn't be coincidence. Every critical redundancy that should have been repaired in the last 4 months was still broken. Someone was being paid to visit, sign off, and leave the problems in place. She photographed the relevant pages with her phone and sent them to a contact she hadn't used in 2 years. A woman named Ellis who worked in a capacity that didn't have a clean title and who owed Mara a favor that was considerably larger than this. Soros vendor ID attached. Need entity trace and financial history. Priority. Ellis responded in 40 minutes. Will take 48 hours. You back in? Mara looked at the message for a moment. Just passing through, she typed back. She set the phone down and went back to the files. By 5 p.m., she had built a fairly complete picture of how Vektara had been softening the facility for months, not through direct action, but through the patient, methodical corruption of the maintenance infrastructure around it. Small delays, small failures, each one deniable on its own. Together they added up to a facility that looked functional, but was running on the structural equivalent of good intentions and luck. Osi appeared in the doorway. The fuel depot confirmed, he said. Delivery is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Move it to tomorrow morning. He looked at her. They said afternoon was the earliest. Tell them the contract specifies priority delivery for critical infrastructure and that I'll be calling their regional director personally if I don't have fuel trucks at this gate by 9 a.m. She paused. Use those words exactly. Osi looked like a man who was recalibrating something. He took out his phone and walked back down the hall. She turned back to the files. Benedict appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed. You find something? He said. Yes. The maintenance contractor? She looked at him. He was 26 and had the intuitive reasonings of someone older, and she was going to have to figure out his background at some point. What made you think maintenance? She asked. He shrugged one shoulder. Because the cameras were broken and the generator was low and the radio system had dead zones that someone should have caught. And none of it was the kind of thing that fails all at once. It's the kind of thing that fails when nobody fixes it. So either this facility has very bad luck or someone is managing the bad luck. Someone is managing it, she said. He nodded. Didn't look surprised. What's your background? She asked. Army. 4 years. Combat engineer. Where? He named a deployment region that told her enough. He'd been in environments where the infrastructure itself was the target, where the first thing an adversary did was degrade the systems you depended on before they ever engaged directly. He'd learned to read the environment the same way she did, looking for patterns in what was broken rather than what was intact. You noticed the camera before I got here, she said. Yes. Did you document it? I told Osi. He submitted the request. Nothing happened. He met her eyes. I was starting to think nothing was going to happen until one of us got hurt. She looked at him for a moment. That's still possible, she said. I want you to understand that. I can't promise this doesn't go sideways. I know, but I can tell you what I think happens if we do this right. She turned back to the map. I think we have 24 to 48 hours before they move. I think they're going to come at night, and they're going to come from at least 2 directions. I think the eastern approach through the relay station is going to be one of them, because that's the critical point and because the camera on that angle was dark for 6 weeks. She put her finger on the eastern fence line. They've had 6 weeks of a blind spot to plan around. They don't know it's fixed yet. Benedict straightened slightly. They don't know the camera is back online. No. So they think they have cover. Yes. He looked at the map. She watched him work through it, the shift in his expression as the implication settled. You fixed the cameras on purpose, he said. Not quite a question. Not just to have coverage. To have coverage they don't know about. The camera being broken was an intelligence advantage for them, she said. Fixing it turns it into an intelligence advantage for us. Now we can see their approach. They think we can't. Benedict was quiet for a moment. You knew they'd come before the tactical team arrives. I assessed it as likely, yes. And you didn't tell Osi that part. Osi has enough to carry. She picked up her coffee, remembered it was cold, set it down. I'm telling you because you're going to be in the relay station when they hit, and you need to know what you're defending and why. He held her gaze. There was something in his expression, not fear exactly, but the particular quality of someone who was looking directly at a serious thing and deciding not to look away. Okay, get some sleep, she said. 4 hours minimum. I need you functional tonight. He pushed off the doorframe. He was almost out the door when he stopped. Ms. Voss, he said without turning around. Vasek. Did you know him? No. He was my uncle's friend. Not a close friend, but he paused. I took this job partly because of what happened to him. I thought if I understood what this place was, I could figure out what went wrong. She was quiet for a moment. And have you? He turned then. He was alone, Benedict said, and he knew it. He left. Mara stood at the map for a long time after he was gone. The operations room was quiet, except for the low hum of the equipment and the occasional crackle of the radio Priya running through the position checks, each guard acknowledging in turn the facility's heartbeat ticking along in 30-minute intervals. She thought about Vasek. She thought about the 11 days and what they must have felt like, the weight of a hostile environment pressing in from every direction and no one to share the load with. She'd been in that place before. Not this facility, not this operation, but places that felt like it from the inside. The specific texture of knowing that the threat was real and the resources were inadequate and the margin for error was shrinking by the hour. She'd learned eventually that the worst thing you could do in that situation was try to carry it alone. Not because asking for help was easy. It wasn't, but because the attempt to carry it alone was itself a failure mode. It made you rigid, predictable. It ground you down in ways that the external threat didn't have to. She looked at the map. She looked at the marked positions, the amended rotation schedule, the camera feeds that were now live and clear. She thought about 2 vehicles sitting on a service road for 3 hours and 40 minutes while someone with binoculars counted the people below. She picked up her radio. All positions. Voss. Full check-in. They answered, one by one. East Post, West Post, North Perimeter, Gate, Communications. 5 voices in sequence, each one slightly different in tone and cadence, each one belonging to a person who had agreed, not wholeheartedly, not without reservation, to follow her lead into whatever was coming. She listened to each one. Copy all, she said. Good work today. Get through your shifts and get rest when you can. Tomorrow's going to be longer. She set the radio down. Outside the operations building, the sun was dropping behind the ridge. The valley was filling with shadow from the bottom up. The light retreating to the peaks, the facility's floodlights clicking on one by one as the automated system caught the ambient drop. In the eastern camera feed, the relay station sat quiet and intact. In the northern camera feed, the service road was empty. She watched both screens. At 9:47 p.m., the northern road sensor flagged another vehicle. Just one this time. It stopped at the edge of the camera's range, sat for 4 minutes with its lights off, then reversed and disappeared. She wrote down the time. She was still at the operations table at midnight. When Osi came back in with 2 cups of coffee, that were actually hot this time and set one in front of her without saying anything. She picked it up. "Fuel truck confirmed for 8 a.m., he said. "Good." He sat down across from her. He looked tired in the bone-deep way of someone who'd been tired for a long time and had stopped noticing it until they sat down. He wrapped his hands around his mug and looked at the camera feeds. "How long have you been doing this?" he asked. "Which part?" "The part where you walk into a place that's about to fall apart and hold it together." She thought about it. "Long enough that I'm not sure I know how to do anything else." He nodded slowly. "Is that okay with you?" She didn't answer right away. The camera feeds showed nothing moving. The radio was quiet. Somewhere outside, Tomas was on the gate, and Daku had the north perimeter, and Benedict was in the Rislese, a station getting 4 hours sleep, is a cot he'd dragged in from the equipment room. "Ask me in a few days," she said. Osi almost smiled. Almost. He drank his coffee and looked at the screens, and she drank hers and looked at the screens, and the facility ran through its midnight checks with the quiet efficiency of machine that had been adjusted and was running, for the first time in months, the way it was supposed to. At 2 a.m., the eastern perimeter sensor registered movement. Not a vehicle. Footsteps. Not a vehicle. Footsteps. Mara was on her feet before the sensor reading, finished updating, her hand already on the radio. She forced herself to stop, forced herself to look at the screen for 3 full seconds, before she keyed anything. Because reacting fat and reacting right were different things, and this moment required the second one. That's the second one. The eastern perimeter sensor was pressure-based, embedded in the ground along the fence line, calibrated to distinguish animal weight from human. The reading showed 2 contact points, moving in tandem, roughly shoulder-width apart. One person, walking carefully, not running, deliberate. One person was a probe. You sent one person to test a perimeter before you committed a team. She keyed the radio on the channel that reached only Benedict. "East position. You awake?" His response came back in under 4 seconds. "Awake, eastern fence line. One contact, moving south along the exterior. Do not engage, do not turn on lights, do not move. Tell me when you can hear anything." A pause. Then, "Copy. I'm at the east window. No visual yet." She switched to the main channel. "Tomas. Daku, quiet check. No response required unless you have contact." 2 clicks. Acknowledgement without words. She looked at the northern camera. Empty road. She looked at the western sensor board. Nothing. She looked at the eastern feeds, where the fence line ran through the edge of the floodlight coverage and then disappeared into darkness beyond it. The contact was still moving south. Slower now. She crossed to the equipment locker on the far wall, opened it, and pulled out the facility's single set of night vision binoculars, older model. Generation 2. Not great, but functional. She also took the short-barreled shotgun from the rack below it, checked the load by touch, and racked a shell into the chamber with a sound that was quiet but definitive. Osi had stood up from his chair. He was watching her. "Stay on the comms board," she said. "Don't leave this room." "Where are you?" "If I call a code red on this channel, you get Northstar's emergency line and you keep them on until someone confirms they've dispatched. Don't wait for my instruction. Just do it. Mara." She was already out the door. The night outside was cold and very clear. No wind. The kind of still air that carried sound farther than people expected, which was useful if you understood it, and dangerous if you didn't. The floodlights covered the main compound gate, central yard, the gap between operations and the relay station. But the perimeter fence on the eastern side sat at the edge of the coverage, lit on the inside and dark on the outside. She moved along the inside of the fence line, keeping to the shadow of the equipment shed that ran parallel to it, her footsteps deliberate and quiet on the gravel. The night vision binoculars were around her neck. The shotgun was in her hands. Her breathing was slow and controlled, and her heart rate was elevated in the specific way it elevated when the situation was real. Not the cardio elevation of a run, but the sharper, cleaner elevation of acute awareness every system in her body running slightly faster and more precisely than usual. She came to the corner of the equipment shed and stopped. She raised the binoculars and looked through the fence into the darkness beyond. It took her 11 seconds to find him. He was crouched against the outside of the fence line, maybe 40 feet from her position, in the gap between two of the fence posts where the shadow was deepest. He was wearing dark clothing and had a pack on his back, and he was looking at the fence itself rather than through it, examining the connection points between the chain link sections, running his gloved hand along the bottom edge where the link met the ground anchor. He was looking for cut points, checking the integrity of the fence from the outside to find the easiest place to breach it. Mara watched him for 30 seconds. Then she stepped out of the shadow of the equipment shed into the edge of the floodlight coverage and said in a clear and carrying voice, "I can see you." The figure went completely still. "The camera on this section of the fence has been operational for 22 hours, she said. "I have your face and your approach route on recording. Whatever you're being paid for this, it's not enough to make the next few seconds a good idea." 3 seconds of silence. The figure stood up slowly. He was medium height, solidly built, and he stood with the specific balance of someone trained weight-centered, hands visible, the posture of a person who was deciding whether the situation had options. "You're the new consultant," he said. His voice was even. No particular accent. The statement was almost conversational, which was more unsettling than if he'd been aggressive. "Go back to whoever sent you," she said. "Tell them the probe failed and the facility is covered. Tell them yourself." He reached into his jacket. Mara raised the shotgun. He stopped. Slowly, he withdrew his hand. He was holding a phone. He held it up so she could see it, turned it toward himself, and appeared to take a photograph of something. Then he put it away, looked at her for a moment, and walked back into the darkness. She stood at the fence line and listened to his footsteps recede until she couldn't hear them. Then she keyed her radio. "Benedict, did you get any of that?" "I heard the conversation," he said. "Not much else." He was photographing himself. Proof of approach showing whoever sent him that he got to the fence. She looked at the spot where the figure had crouched. "They're documenting the probe. Building an operational picture. That's coordinated." "Yes." She looked at the camera mounted on the fence post above her. Its indicator light glowed steady green. It's also the last easy look they get at this place. She went back inside. She called Halst at 4 in the morning without worrying about the hour because the hour wasn't relevant anymore. He answered on the third ring, which told her he'd been awake or close to it. "The probe happened," she said. "Single individual, eastern fence line, 200. He retreated on contact. They have our perimeter mapped, and they have documented confirmation that they reached the fence. The attack timeline just compressed." A long pause. "How compressed?" 48 hours was my outer estimate before the probe. After it, probably less. The tactical team is still 60 hours out. "I know, Ms. Voss, I need to be direct with you. Our legal exposure, if something happens to facility personnel, is not my concern right now," she said. "What I need from you is the status of the regional law enforcement contact. The one your files say was established when the first incident happened." Another pause. "That relationship has been complicated." Define complicated. "There are credible indicators that at least one official in the regional security apparatus has financial connections to Vektara. We flagged it to the international oversight body, but the review is ongoing, and we don't have confirmed names." She'd expected something like this. The pattern of vendor corruption she'd found in the maintenance files pointed upstream. It didn't happen without cover. But hearing it stated plainly still tightened something in her chest. "So we can't call the local authorities without potentially tipping Vektara that we're calling," she said. "Correct. That's why we haven't. I understand. Get me the name of the international oversight contact. The investigator, not the administrator. I need someone who can receive documentation and act on it, not file it. I can do that, and I need the tactical team's ETA updated every 4 hours. If something moves on their end, I need to know immediately, not when it's convenient. Understood. A pause. Ms. Voss, are you all right? She thought about what a strange question it was, and then thought that it probably wasn't strange at all, that it was the question a person asked when they were worried and didn't have a professional framing for it. I'm functional, she said. That's what matters. She hung up. The day passed in the specific way that days pass when you're waiting for something you can't accelerate. Not slowly exactly, but with a quality of pressure, each hour slightly heavier than the one before it. Mara moved through the facility with the methodical efficiency of someone running down a mental checklist that had no end, only new items added as old ones resolved. The fuel truck arrived at 8:15, 15 minutes late, which she noted but accepted. The driver was a heavy-set man named Gores, who had a genuinely unreadable face, and who watched her watching him with the neutral expression of someone used to being observed and untroubled by it. She had Tomas present for the delivery and documented the tank readings, before and after. When Gores left, she had Tomas run the plate and sent the result to Ellis alongside the source documentation. The backup generator now had 48 hours of fuel capacity. That was something. At 10 a.m., she held a full team briefing in the operations room. All 7 guards plus OC. She stood at the map and told them plainly what she'd found and what she expected, without inflation and without minimization, because people who were about to be in a dangerous situation deserved accurate information to make accurate decisions. I believe Vektara is going to make a move on this facility within the next 24 to 48 hours, she said. I believe they've been preparing this move for months through systematic degradation of our support infrastructure. And I believe the probe last night was their final confirmation before they commit. Based on their pattern, they'll use vehicles for a primary breach point and personnel on foot for a secondary approach. Most likely the main gate and the eastern fence line simultaneously. Nobody spoke. I want to be clear about something, she continued. My job is to protect this facility and the people in it. That includes you. The decisions I've made about positioning and protocol are designed to minimize exposure, not maximize contact. If we do this right, we make their approach visible, we create problems for their coordination, and we make the facility look like a significantly harder target than they planned for. Daku from the back of the room, and if we don't do it right, then we fall back to the hardened positions, this building and the relay station, and we hold until Northstar's tactical team arrives. She looked at him. But I'd rather not do it that way. What's the difference? The difference is whether we're reacting to their plan or making them react to ours. She put her hand on the map. The camera they thought was dark is live. The fence points they scouted have been reinforced with sensor relays. I set up this morning. The generator is fully fueled. Our radio protocol has redundancies they don't know about. She looked around the room. They did their reconnaissance on a facility that doesn't exist anymore. They're coming for the version of this place they saw from that ridge road. That's our advantage. Benedict, near the window, was looking at the map with his arms folded. How many are we expecting? The vehicle profile from the ridge suggests 6 to 10, possibly more in reserve. She held his gaze. We're 7 plus OC on comms. The math was obvious to everyone in the room. Nobody stated it. You've all been doing this job for months, in conditions that were quietly being made worse, she said. You stayed anyway. That means something. She paused. Tonight, I need that same thing. Just pointed in a specific direction. She dismissed them to their positions and stood at the map by herself for a few minutes after they'd gone, looking at the marked fence lines and camera angles and the colored dots representing guard positions. 7 people and a woman who'd spent 8 months pretending to be someone she wasn't. It would have to be enough. Night came down hard and fast. By 9 p.m., the valley was completely dark below the facility, and the mountains were invisible against the sky. The floodlights turned the compound into a bright island surrounded by darkness, which created good visibility inside the perimeter and terrible visibility outside it good for an attacker. Using the dark, not good for defenders trying to see approach routes, which was why the cameras mattered. The cameras could see what the lights couldn't. Mara was in the operations room at 9:30 when the northern road sensor flagged the first vehicle. Not parked this time, moving. Coming down the service road from the ridge. She keyed the radio. All positions. Heads up. We have vehicle movement, northern approach. This might be it. A second sensor flagged 30 seconds later. Eastern fence line, pressure contacts. More than one this time. The sensor algorithm was reading 3 separate contact patterns, moving in loose file. Benedict, she said. Eastern fence. 3 contacts inbound. I've got them on the camera feed. His voice was steady. Slightly faster than usual, but steady. They're carrying something. Long shape, 2 of them. Long shapes, rifles or breaching equipment, or both. Hold position. Do not engage until they breach. She looked at the northern sensor. The vehicle was still moving, now past the ridge access gate and onto the slope road that curved it down toward the facility's main approach. Tomas, main gate, vehicle inbound, northern approach. ETA about 4 minutes, copy. Tomas's voice was flat and professional. Gate is secured. Daku, northern interior perimeter. You're between the vehicle and the main building. If they breach the gate, I need to know the second it happens, and then I need you in the operations building. Understood. She looked at the screens. 2 convergent approaches. Exactly what she'd assessed. The team was on foot breach and penetrate through the fence line while the vehicle drew attention at the main gate. It was a reasonable 2-vector attack, the kind that worked when the defenders were split and couldn't cover both simultaneously. The problem for Vektara was that she'd been expecting it. Priya, she said, get Northstar emergency on the line. Don't wait. Call now and keep them on. She heard Priya pick up the phone. She picked up the short-barreled shotgun from the table and moved to the door. Here. Then she stopped. She went back to the comms board and looked at the eastern camera feed. Benedict's feed from inside the relay station. The 3 contacts were at the fence now. He could see them in the camera image. Dark shapes crouched at the chain link. One of them had a tool of some kind, working at the fence bottom where the anchor met the post. She watched for 3 seconds. They were at the exact point the probe had examined the night before. The same spot. Of course, they'd sent someone to find the easiest breach point, and now they were using it. The breach took 40 seconds. The fence section folded inward. The 3 figures moved through it. Benedict, she said. They're inside the perimeter. Stay in the relay station. Keep the door secured. Copy, a pause. They're moving toward me. I know. Let them come. At the main gate, the vehicle a heavy truck, she could see it now on the northern camera stop 20 feet from the gate and sat with its engine running. No one got out. The headlights were on now, pointed directly at the gate, which was deliberate. The lights would blind anyone looking from inside the compound toward the truck. A public address system. She almost didn't believe it when she heard it. A voice coming from a speaker, mounted on the truck, amplified, and carrying across the entire compound. Northstar facility. This is a notification. You have 10 minutes to open the gate and allow our personnel to enter and conduct a security inspection. Non-compliance will result in escalation. Mara stood in the operations room doorway and listened to this. A security inspection. The audacity of it was almost impressive, presenting a criminal assault as an administrative procedure. She could see the logic of it. If anyone called it in, the initial radio traffic would describe a security inspection dispute, not an armed attack. She keyed the radio. Tomas, do not open the gate. Wasn't planning to. Daku. Report. I've got the truck visual. 2 people got out the back when the announcement started. They're on the west side of the vehicle, using it as cover. 2 more outside the gate, so the 3 through the fence and 2 at the gate minimum, and at least 5 she could account for, with unknown numbers still in the truck. She went to the eastern camera feed. The 3 figures had moved through the compound's outer yard and were approaching the relay station. They were moving in a staggered line, the lead man slightly ahead, the other 2 covering his flanks. The lead man was carrying what she was now certain was a rifle. The second had a bag that clinked faintly when he moved tools, or explosives, or both. They were going for the relay station first. Take out the critical infrastructure, then deal with the personnel. Benedict, she said quietly, when I tell you, I need you to key your radio twice. Just twice. Then get away from the door and get down. A pause. Okay. She took a breath. Then she walked out of the operations building into the compound yard. The floodlights were brutal. She was completely visible, standing in the middle of the central yard with a shotgun at her side. The 3 figures near the relay station froze when they saw her. The 2 at the gate would be watching through the fence. She raised her voice. Vektara, I know you're listening. She didn't shout it. She projected it, the way you learn to project in environments where shouting meant panic. I want you to look at the relay station camera. Look at the indicator light on the housing. It's green. It's been green since last night. Whatever you planned around that camera being dark, you need a new plan. Silence. The truck engine idled. I also want you to know that I've sent documentation of your maintenance contractor arrangement to an international oversight investigator. Source, the invoices, the completed job falsifications, the financial routing. She paused. I sent it 3 hours ago. Which means even if you take this facility tonight, the paper trail is already somewhere you can't reach. The lead figure near the relay station said something to the others. She couldn't hear it. You've been running this operation for months by making sure nobody capable of defending this place was willing to stay, she said. I understand the logic. It worked before. It's not going to work now. The announcement speaker on the truck crackled. A different voice this time. Not the recorded notification, but someone speaking live. Male, accented, carrying the specific flatness of someone who was choosing words carefully. Ms. Voss, we know who you are. She stood still. We know what you were. We know why you left, and we know that you walked away from that life because you didn't want to carry it anymore. A pause. Walk away again. Take your people and go. We have no interest in harming civilians. It was a well-constructed appeal. It even had some truth in it. She had walked away, and the reasons were real. The fact that they'd found them, researched them, weaponized them, told her the intelligence operation against her was deeper than she'd assessed on Birch Lane. She let the suspect sit for 4 seconds. Benedict, she said into the radio, her voice level. Now. 2 clicks. The relay station's exterior lights, all 6 of them, the high-powered floods she'd tested that afternoon and confirmed were fully operational, came on simultaneously. The 3 figures near the station were suddenly standing in full daylight, blinking, completely exposed, their faces turned toward her, visible and clear and recording. At the same moment, Tomas hit the gate override and the vehicle sensor on the approach road activated, a motion-triggered flood that she'd rerouted that afternoon from the maintenance shed. The truck was suddenly illuminated from 3 sides. She raised the shotgun, not at anyone specifically. Just raised it. Every camera on this facility is live, she said. You are on record, all of you. Your vehicles, your faces, your positions. She looked at the 3 near the relay station. I'm asking you to make a decision. The lead figure looked at her. She could see his face clearly, now mid-40s, sharp features, someone who had been in enough situations to know when one had turned wrong. He looked at the camera. He looked at his 2 men. He looked at the relay station door, which was closed and locked and wasn't going to open. He made the decision. He lowered his rifle slowly. Not putting it down, she didn't expect that, but lowering it to his side and stepping back. The 2 men with him followed. On the north side, the truck's engine note changed, rising, then shifting. It reversed. Slowly at first, then faster, moving back up the approach road. The two men who'd been using it as cover went with it. The three in the compound didn't run. They walked, with the measured pace of people who were angry, but not stupid, back toward the breach point in the eastern fence. Mara watched them go. She watched them move through the gap in the chain link and disappear into the darkness of the slope. She stood in the compound yard until she couldn't hear them anymore. Then she exhaled. Tomas appeared at the gate. Daku came around the side of the operations building. She could hear Priya's voice from inside still, on the phone with Northstar, her voice clear and detailed, describing positions and timings. Benedict's voice came over the radio. They're clear of the perimeter. Copy. She lowered the shotgun. Her hands were steady. Good work. She stood in the floodlit yard for another moment. The valley below was dark. The mountains were invisible. The facility hummed around her cameras live, generator full, radio protocol intact, 7 people who had done exactly what she'd asked of them. She thought about what the voice on the speaker had said. We know who you are. We know what you were. She turned and walked back into the operations building. Osi was at the comms board, watching her come in, and his expression was the expression of someone who had just watched something happen that he was still in the process of understanding. She set the shotgun on the table. She sat down. They'll come back, she said. Tonight was a test of our response. When they come back, they'll have adjusted. Osi was quiet for a moment. How long do we have? She looked at the camera feeds. All clear. All live. Long enough, she said. Maybe. She pulled out her phone. There was a message from Ellis, timestamped 40 minutes ago. Source entity, trace complete. Financial routing, goes through 3 shells last one, connects to a holding company with a registered director. You're going to want to sit down for the name. Mara stared at the message. Then she looked up at Ose. I need you to get Hulst on the phone, she said. Right now, the name Ellis had sent her was not a Vektara operative. It was not a logistics manager, or a shell company director, or a regional criminal organizer. It was the name of a Northstar infrastructure board member. The name on Ellis's message was Reiner Vand. Mara had read his biography in Northstar's company materials 3 weeks ago, during the initial vetting process. Board member, 11 years. Former energy sector executive. Philanthropist, if you counted the foundation that bore his name and appeared in press releases whenever Northstar needed to look like a company with a conscience. He had a photograph on the company website, silver-haired, well-dressed, the kind of face that belonged in boardrooms and charity dinners, and nowhere near a criminal network that had been systematically corrupting maintenance contractors and driving security consultants out of a critical infrastructure facility in western Valdora. She looked at the documentation Ellis had attached. 3 shell companies, layered like nesting dolls, each one registered in a different jurisdiction, each one with a director who was either a nominee or a ghost. The last one, the outermost shell, the one that touched the real world, had Vand listed as a registered director under a slightly altered version of his name. Not altered enough. Ellis had flagged it with a single line of annotation. Same DOB, same passport country, different middle initial. Sloppy or arrogant, take your pick. Arrogant, Mara thought. Definitely arrogant. The kind of arrogance that came from 11 years of being untouchable. She looked up at Ose. Hulst, now. I'm calling. He already had his phone to his ear. She stood up for walk and walked to the window. The compound was quiet. The floodlights still burning, the cameras still live, the fenced depression on the eastern perimeter still open, because she hadn't sent anyone out to secure it yet, and she wasn't going to until she'd had this conversation. Outside the wire, Vektara's team was somewhere in the darkness of the valley. Thinking, adjusting, coming to the same conclusion she'd come to when she'd first seen the maintenance log patterns, that someone inside the organization had been managing this operation from a position of complete safety. Hulse picked up on the second ring. Ms. Voss, I've just been briefed by Priya. Reiner Vant, she said. Silence. Not the silence of someone searching their memory. The silence of someone who had just heard something they'd been dreading. I need you to say something, she said. Where did you get that name? His voice had changed. The careful executive register was still there, but something under it had shifted tighter, more controlled, the way a person's voice changed when they were managing a reaction. Financial trace on the maintenance contractor. 3 shells. His name is on the last one. She paused. How long have you known? Another silence. Longer. Gerard, she said, and she used his first name deliberately, cutting through the professional distance. How long? We had indicators, he said. Circumstantial. Nothing that would... How long? 4 months. The words came out flat and tired, like he'd been carrying them. We had a compliance audit 4 months ago that flagged unusual financial relationships in the vendor chain. The audit was internally reviewed. It was reviewed by Van's committee. She closed her eyes briefly. 4 months. The same window as the maintenance failures. The same window as the 2 security consultants who'd been approached and walked away. The same window as Vasek, who had lasted 11 days and come back changed. He buried the audit, she said. The audit was classified as inconclusive and filed. He buried it. She wasn't asking anymore. And you didn't push it, because Van has been on the board for 11 years, and the indicators were circumstantial, and pushing it would have required accusing a senior board member of facilitating a criminal operation against his own company. And nobody in a legal department wants to sign off on that without ironclad documentation. Hulst was quiet. I'm not criticizing you, she said, and she meant it. She'd seen institutional paralysis before and understood its mechanics. I'm establishing what I'm working with. Can you get the compliance audit reopened? With the documentation you have. The documentation Ellis compiled. I'm going to send it to you directly. I'm also going to send it to the international oversight contact you gave me. Both simultaneously right now, so neither chain can be interrupted by the other. She turned from the window. I need you to answer me honestly about one more thing. All right. Vant knows I'm here. He knew I was being hired. He's on the board. He would have seen the contract approval. Which means Vektara knew I was coming before I arrived. She thought about the surveillance photographs on Birch Lane. 3 weeks of watching. They had 6 weeks of a blind camera angle to plan around. They knew the maintenance failures. They knew the guard rotation numbers. She paused. Did Vant know about my background? The silence this time was different. Not dread. Uncertainty. The contract approval went through a standard board summary, Hulse said carefully. Your security credentials were referenced, but the specifics of your prior service were not detailed. That information is restricted. But someone ran a deep background. Someone with resources could have. She thought about the voice on the truck speaker. We know who you are. We know what you were. We know why you left. All right, she said. I'm sending the documentation. Get your legal team awake. And Gerard, she stopped. Yes? Don't tell anyone else on the board until the oversight investigator has received the files and confirmed receipt. No one. A pause. You think there's more than Vand. I think Vand has been on the board for 11 years, and this operation has been running for at least 4 months, and nobody stopped it. I don't know if that's one person or several. Neither do you. She picked up her phone to open the Ellis files. So right now, the fewer people who know, the better. She hung up and forwarded the documentation to Hulst and the oversight contact a woman named Investigator Farron, whose email had been in the file. Hulst sent her yesterday with a covering message that was 3 sentences long and contained no interpretation, just the documents and a request for confirmation of receipt. Farron replied in 11 minutes, received. Do not destroy originals. Do not discuss contents with organization internal contacts until further notice. Are you secure? Mara looked around the operations room. OC at the comms board. Priya wrapping up the Northstar emergency call. The compound quiet outside the windows. Functionally, she typed back. For now. Tomas came in at 3:15 a.m. to report the eastern fence breach secured. He'd gone out with Daku and zip-tied the chain link back to the posts, which wouldn't stop a determined entry but would register on the sensor if anyone disturbed it. He set a mug of coffee on the table next to Mara without being asked and stood looking at the camera feeds. They're not gone, he said. No, just regrouping. Yes. He pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. He was 51 years old and had been at this facility for 2 years and had the look of a man who'd made peace with difficult circumstances by not thinking too far ahead. The man on the speaker, he said. He knew your name. Yes. He knew things about you. Yes. She looked at the screens. That's been the consistent pressure point. They've been using it since Birch Lane. Tomas looked at her. He had the kind of face that didn't ask questions it wasn't prepared to hear answers to. Did it work? She considered the question honestly. For about 3 seconds, she said. He almost laughed. Not quite. The situation wasn't quite laughable yet, but almost. The part about walking away, she said. That part's true. I left a particular kind of work because I'd done enough of it, and because some of it stays with you in ways that aren't. She stopped. Selected different words. I wasn't running. I was done. And now? She looked at the eastern camera. The relay station, intact. Benedict's position. I'm not sure anymore, she said. Which is possibly the most honest thing I've said in 8 months. Tomas was quiet for a moment. What kind of work? He asked. Not prying, just asking. The way you ask someone a thing when you decided they were worth asking. Special operations, she said. Naval. Long deployments. Small teams. The kind of missions that don't appear in any official record because they were never officially ordered. She picked up the coffee. It was still hot. I was good at it. That was the problem, in a way. Being good at something doesn't mean it's sustainable. How long? 11 years. He absorbed that. And then you became a risk analyst. And then I became a risk analyst. She drank the coffee, which turned out to be more relevant than expected. Northstar's tactical team arrived at 6:40 a.m., 14 hours ahead of the original estimate. 6 people in 2 vehicles, professional and quiet, led by a compact woman named Sergeant Ilse Kaur, who had the clipped efficiency of someone who'd run enough of these deployments to have stopped finding them interesting. She shook Mara's hand at the gate and looked at the compound with the assessing gaze of someone taking inventory. Brief me, Kaur said. Mara briefed her. All of it, the probe, the 2-vector approach, the repulsion, the fence breach, the speaker address, the camera situation, the fuel, the guard rotation. She also told her about Vand, because Kaur's team was operating inside Northstar's organizational structure, and they needed to know that the threat had an internal dimension. Kaur listened without interrupting. When Mara finished, she was quiet for a moment. The board member, she said. That's confirmed? Financial documentation, yes. Legal confirmation is pending the oversight review. And Halst knows. Halst knows. The oversight investigator knows. Nobody else inside Northstar knows yet, by my instruction. Kaur looked at her. There was something in the look. Not challenge exactly, but calibration. The specific assessment of one professional measuring another. Your instruction, Kaur said. Yes, you're a contracted consultant. I'm the person who built the documentation and the person who assessed the internal exposure risk. Mara met her eyes. You can override me, but I'd like to hear your reasoning if you do, because the last time internal Northstar communication moved faster than the oversight review, a compliance audit got buried. A beat. Fair enough, Kaur said. She deployed her team efficiently, 2 on perimeter reinforcement, 1 on comms integration, 1 on the eastern fence repair, 2 in rotating overwatch on the high points of the compound. Within 90 minutes, the facility felt structurally different. Not impenetrable, nothing was impenetrable, but layered in a way it hadn't been before. Mara watched the integration and felt something she hadn't expected, the specific, slightly uncomfortable sensation of not being the only capable person in the room anymore. She sat with it for a moment, recognized it, let it settle. It was fine. It was actually fine. At 10 a.m., Hulst called back. "The oversight investigator has contacted our general counsel," he said. "Independently, not through the board. The documentation has been formally received and logged. Farron's office has issued a hold on Van Tiet's board communications access pending review. He knows. He will within the hour when he tries to access his board portal and finds it suspended. There's a protocol. They notify him through legal counsel. What's his likely response?" Hulst paused. "Honestly, I don't know. 11 years. I've sat across from that man in every quarterly review for 6 of them, and I never—" He stopped. The weight of that unfinished sentence was audible. "You weren't supposed to see it," she said. "That was the whole point of the construction. Shells, nominees, clean financial distance. He wasn't careless. He was careful enough for a long time. The maintenance contractor is what cracked it. That was operational sloppiness, not structural sloppiness. Too many invoices, too consistent a pattern. Does that make me feel better about missing it?" "No," she said honestly, "but it makes it accurate." Another pause. "Ms. Voss, the oversight investigator asked me something I want to relay to you." "Go ahead." She asked whether the consultant currently on site would be willing to provide a formal witness statement covering the events at the facility. The probe, the attempted approach, the speaker communication, specifically the acknowledgement that they knew your identity and prior service history. She said it constitutes direct evidence of organized criminal intelligence gathering against a protected infrastructure asset. Mara looked at the compound through the operations room window. Core's team moving efficiently. Daku and Tomas on a break in the shade of the equipment shed, not talking, just sitting with cups of something hot. Benedict at the eastern camera station, watching the feed, with the focused attention of someone who'd decided that watching carefully was the thing he could control. "Yes," she said. "I'll provide a statement. There's something else." Hulst's voice changed register again back to that careful, weighted quality. "She asked about your service record, not the specifics. She said she has authorization to access them through a separate channel. But she asked whether you would consent to that access being used as context for the investigation." Mara was quiet. 8 months of groceries and morning runs and quarterly briefings that didn't require her full attention. 8 months of a name that didn't mean anything to anyone, a face that didn't register, a past that stayed where she'd put it. "Yes," she said. The word came out more easily than she expected. "Are you sure? Tell her yes." She hung up. Osi was at the desk behind her. He'd been there for most of the morning, running the facility's operational log with the methodical care he applied to everything. And she knew he'd heard enough of the conversation to have action, to have a picture. She turned around. He looked at her steadily. "Naval Special Operations," he said. It wasn't a question. He'd heard enough. "Yes," she said. "How long ago?" "I separated about 3 years back. Spent the first year doing nothing useful, the next year getting the consulting credentials, the last 8 months." She gestured at the room around them, attempting to be ordinary. He looked at her for a moment. "How was that going?" "Adequately," she said. "Until Tuesday evening on Birch Lane." He almost smiled. "And now?" She looked at the camera feeds. All live, all clear. Core's team moving through their positions with quiet competence. "Now I'm trying to figure out," she said, "whether this is something I'm doing temporarily or something I'm doing." He nodded slowly, the nod of someone who understood that question from the inside and wasn't going to offer a pat answer to it. "For what it's worth," he said, "what you did here in the last 48 hours, the cameras, the rotation, the documentation, the way you handled last night." He paused. Vasek was a good man. He didn't deserve what happened to him. But I think if he'd had what you built here, he might have made it past 11 days. She didn't say anything for a moment. Thank you, she said. It came out simply, without the professional coding she usually applied to things like this. O.C. nodded once and went back to his log. The second approach came at 2:17 p.m., not at night daylight, which was either desperation or a deliberate shift in tactics, and she'd decided it didn't matter which. Kor saw it first on the northern sensor. 4 vehicles this time, moving fast down the service road in convoy, no pretense of surveillance or patience. They'd abandoned the psychological approach. They were coming directly. All positions, Kor said into her radio, with the flat economy of someone in their element. Convoy inbound, north approach. 4 vehicles, high speed. This is not a probe. Mara was at the gate when the first vehicle came into view, another heavy truck, this one with reinforced bumpers, moving at the kind of speed that suggested they intended to go through the gate rather than wait for it to open. Kor, she said. Vehicle barrier? Deployed. Kor's team had spent the morning setting up collapsible vehicle barriers at the gate approach rated for up to 3 tons at 40 kilometers per hour. The truck was going to find out their rating was accurate. Tomas, Daku, main building, now. She looked at Benedict's position on the camera. Benedict, stay. The convoy reached the gate approach at speed. The lead truck hit the vehicle barrier at approximately 30 kilometers per hour slower than the gate approach angle suggested, which meant the driver had seen it and braked, which meant they deployed it visibly enough to be a deterrent as well as a physical stop. The truck lurched to a halt, the front bumper deformed against the barrier, and for 2 seconds nothing moved. Then the doors opened. 8 people out of 4 vehicles. Some were carrying rifles openly now. No pretense, no inspection announcement. One of them had a launcher of some kind on his shoulder, and Mara registered it and felt her stomach drop, and then methodically set the feeling aside, because the feeling wasn't useful right now. Kor's voice came over the radio, completely level. I have the launcher. East, Overwatch, cover the fence line. The man with the launcher raised it. He wasn't pointing it at anyone. He was pointing it at the fence line, at the gate structure itself. A warning, or an opening move. The distance between those 2 things was about to collapse. Mara said, I see it. If he fires that at the gate structure, we lose the barrier integrity, and they walk through. I know. Do you have a shot? A pause that lasted less than 2 seconds, but felt longer. Not clean. He's using the vehicle for partial cover. 8 people against Kor's 6 plus Mara's 7, and a launcher that would change the math of the gate structure in about 4 seconds if the man holding it decided to use it. She thought about the voice on the speaker last night. Walk away again. She picked up her radio. Not the internal channel, the external one, the frequency she'd identified from the probe's equipment when Tomas and Daku had found the discarded scout pack near the eastern fence. A long shot. But she'd programmed it in anyway, because discarding possibilities she might need later was a habit she'd broken a long time ago. She keyed the external frequency. This frequency is monitored and recorded, she said, as is everything happening at this gate right now. The board member who's been running your internal access to this facility has had his communications suspended as of 4 hours ago. The financial documentation connecting your operation to his holding company was received by an international oversight investigator at 3:40 a.m. The people who authorized this operation against a protected infrastructure asset are currently looking at criminal exposure in 3 jurisdictions. She paused. The operational value of this facility to your network is 0 if the financial structure that funds the network is being dismantled. You know that better than I do. Static. The man with the launcher held his position. Then her radio crackled. Not internal, not core, not any of her people. The external frequency, someone responding. You're bluffing, the voice said. It was different from last night's speaker voice. Younger, more uncertain, which was either genuine or performed, and she'd decided it didn't matter. Call the board member, she said. Right now. Ask him to verify his access to Northstar's internal systems. I'll wait. 30 seconds of silence. The man with the launcher lowered it by about 15 degrees. Not down, but not aimed. You don't have the authority to prosecute anyone, the voice said. No, she agreed. But Investigator Farron does, and what she received at 3:40 a.m. gives her enough to start. She looked at the man with the launcher. The facility is reinforced. The documentation is already out. The person who is protecting your operation from the inside is already contained. What are you gaining from this? A longer silence. She watched the man with the launcher. Watched the angle of it drop another few degrees. Then a sound she recognized, Simeon, on the other end of the radio exhaling. The specific exhale of a decision being made. Pull back, the voice said. Not to her, to someone else on their end. The 8 people at the gate moved back to their vehicles. Not running, walking, with the controlled anger of people who were aborting rather than retreating, which was a meaningful distinction. The vehicles started. They turned on the approach road and drove back up the slope. Mara stood at the gate and watched them go. Cor appeared at her shoulder. She hadn't heard her approach. That frequency, Cor said. How did you get it? The probe left equipment behind. I found it in the fence scan this morning. She lowered the radio. It was a guess that anyone senior enough to make the abort call would be monitoring it. Cor looked at her. The calibration in her eyes had shifted to something else. A guess. An educated one. You could have told me about the frequency. Yes. She met Cor's gaze. I could have. Cor studied her for a moment. Naval Special Operations, she said. How did you... Hulst called me before I deployed. Said I might need context. Cor's expression was neutral, but not unfriendly. He also said you'd told him to restrict internal communications, which was the right call and the kind of call that gets consultants fired under normal circumstances. These aren't normal circumstances. No, Cor agreed. They're not. She looked out at the empty approach road. The launcher concerns me. They escalated to heavy equipment on a second approach. That means the abort wasn't a strategic withdrawal. It was a tactical pause. I know. They're going to come back with more. I know that too. Cor looked at the facility, the camera feeds, the reinforced gate, the guards she could see on their positions. What do you need? She asked. It was a straightforward question, and Mara recognized what it cost someone like Cor to ask it. The implicit acknowledgement that the consultant who was technically subordinate to the tactical team had earned the right to be asked. I need the oversight investigator to move faster, she said. If Van Tiet's financing structure is publicly frozen, Vektara loses the cover that's been protecting this operation. They can't sustain a drawn-out engagement against a hardened facility without financial infrastructure. That's a legal timeline, not ours to control. No, but I can push it. She took out her phone. I'm going to call Farron directly. Not through Hulst, directly. Cor nodded once. I'll reinforce the northern approach with the vehicle barrier extension. And the eastern fence needs a proper repair, not zip ties. I'll have it done in 2 hours. They separated Cor back to her team, Mara to the operations building, with her phone already dialing. Farron picked up on the first ring. Ms. Voss, she said. I was about to call you. They made a second approach, Mara said. Daylight. 4 vehicles, 8 personnel, launcher equipment. I aborted it using the documentation to undercut their operational rationale. But it was temporary. They'll adjust. I see. Farron's voice was measured and professional, with the quiet energy of someone who ran on urgency the way other people ran on sleep. The board member has retained legal counsel. He's denying knowledge of the shell company. Of course he is. His position is that the nominee director used his information without authorization. The same nominee director who filed and approved the compliance audit that buried the financial indicators 4 months ago. Mara kept her voice even. That audit is in the same file Ellis sent you. A pause. Yes, I saw it. Another pause, this one deliberate. Ms. Voss, I want to ask you something directly. Go ahead. Your prior service, the restricted file. I've requested access through the appropriate channel, and I'm told it'll take 48 hours to clear. What's the question? Are there aspects of your prior service that are relevant to how you've been operating at this facility? Not to your capability. I can see those. But to the organization that's targeting you specifically. Mara was quiet for a moment. The honest answer was, possibly. The honest answer was that 11 years of compartmentalized operations left threads that didn't always stay neatly cut, that the people who decided 3 weeks of surveillance on Birch Lane were necessary before sending 3 men to stop her from signing a contract had done more research network usually bothered with. That the voice on the speaker knew things, not just her name, not just her work history, but the why of it, the specific texture of the decision she'd made to leave that suggested sources beyond standard investigative capability. Possibly, she said. Can you elaborate, not without knowing what's in the file and what's connected to what? She looked out the window at the compound. But I can tell you that the intelligence they have on me isn't consistent with a criminal organization working from open sources. Silence. That's significant, Farron said carefully. Yes. It suggests the financial connection to Van T is one thread, not the whole fabric. Yes. Mara watched the northern camera. Empty road. For now, I think Van is how they got operational access to the facility. But the intelligence on me came from somewhere else. Somewhere that has access to restricted personnel files. The silence on Farron's end had changed quality. I'll expedite the file access, she said. Significantly. How fast? By tomorrow morning. I'll pull the necessary authorization personally. Good. Mara leaned against the wall. She was tired in the way that arrived not all at once but in increments, accumulating in the background while the foreground demanded attention. There's something else. Yes? The tactical team is here. The facility is reinforced. The documentation is with you. But Vektara made a daylight approach with a launcher. That's not an organization that's worried about consequences yet. They won't be worried until the financial freeze is visible, till Van's exposure is public enough that they can't pretend the protection is still in place. Public disclosure before the investigation is complete creates legal complications. I understand that. I'm not asking for disclosure. I'm asking for the freeze to be extended to the operational accounts, not just the board communications, the shell companies, the holding entity, the accounts that fund the people who showed up at my gate today with a launcher. Farron was quiet for a moment. That's within my authority, she said. It's aggressive. Yes. If the freeze is challenged legally and the underlying charges don't hold. The underlying charges will hold, Mara said. The documentation is solid. Ellis is thorough. Another pause. Who is Ellis? Someone I know. Farron seemed to accept this without pushing, which told Mara something about Farron's background that she filed away. I'll initiate the account freeze within the hour, she said. You'll see the effect if the network's operational funding is interrupted. They'll know it. Their behavior will change. I'm counting on it. She hung up. Osi was at the doorway. He'd been listening, not hovering, just present the way he'd been since she arrived. The oversight investigator, he said. She's moving faster now. Yes, because of what you told her, about the intelligence on you. Partly. Mara set the phone on the table, and partly because she's good at her job and the documentation is solid and she was looking for the authorization to move quickly. I gave her a reason. He nodded, looked at the camera feeds. Benedict's been at that camera station for 6 hours, he said. I know. Send him a break. 20 minutes. He won't take it. Tell him it's an order. Osi almost smiled, more fully this time than before, the kind of smile that arrived when something small was genuinely funny. He took out his radio. Mara sat down. She looked at the feeds. Northern approach clear. Eastern fence newly repaired. Core's team working on the extension. West side covered. Gate reinforced. Her phone buzzed. Ellis. Account freeze just hit. Watching the chatter on 3 monitored channels, there's movement. They're scrambling. She stared at the message. Then another from Ellis. 30 seconds later, Sumson Sr. just went dark on all comms. That's either very bad or very good, depending on which side you're on. She set the phone down. 40 minutes later, Cor came into the operations room and set her own phone on the table. Northern sensor, she said. Vehicle movement. But it's going the wrong direction. Mara looked up. Away from the facility, Cor said. All 4 vehicles. Moving back up the ridge road. Mara stood up and went to the camera. She watched the northern feed the service road, the ridge. A convoy of vehicles, moving at normal speed, heading away. She watched until they crested the ridge and disappeared. The compound was quiet. The cameras were live. The generator hummed its steady note. She stood at the screen for a long time. Then Benedict's voice came over the radio comm, precise, carrying just the faint edge of something that wasn't quite disbelief. Eastern perimeter clear, he said. All clear. No contacts. She keyed her radio. Copy, she said. All positions. Hold your rotations. This isn't over. But something had shifted. She could feel it in the quality of the silence. Not the tight, pressurized silence of a threat that was present, but the different, more open silence of a threat that had, at least for this moment, paused. She looked at the camera feeds for a long time. Then she sat down, picked up her cold coffee, and started writing her witness statement for Investigator Farron. Beginning. At the beginning, Briarwood Heights, Tuesday evening, a black sedan idling without headlights. She wrote without stopping for 2 hours. She finished the witness statement at midnight. It ran to 19 pages. She read it back once, changed 3 words, and sent it to Farron without reading it a third time, because reading it a third time would have meant second-guessing it. And second-guessing a factual account was a way of making it less factual rather than more. The statement covered everything. Birch Lane, the photographs, the tall man's words, the drive to Valdora, the probe, the speaker address, the second approach with the launcher. It covered the maintenance contractor documentation and the financial trace. It covered in precise and deliberately unembellished language what the voice on the speaker had said about her prior service and why that suggested an intelligence source beyond standard criminal network capability. She included 1 paragraph at the end that she'd rewritten 4 times before settling on language she could live with. It described in general terms the nature of her prior service, not the specifics which were still classified, but enough to establish that the knowledge Vektara had demonstrated about her background required access to information that was not publicly available. She read that paragraph 1 more time before she sent it. Then she sent it. Then she sat in the quiet operations room and looked at the camera feeds for a while without really seeing them. OC came in at 1 a.m. with actual food, not terrible coffee. A plate of something that had been heated on the facility's small kitchen range and smelled like it might have been stew at some point in its life. He set it in front of her and sat down. Eat, he said. She ate. It was better than it smelled. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, something that developed between people who had been through something together and didn't need to narrate it. My wife called this afternoon, Ose said eventually. What did you tell her? That work was busy. He looked at the feeds. She's used to that answer. How long have you been here? At this facility. 2 years and 3 months. He turned the mug in his hands. I took it because the pay was good and because Valdora was somewhere I could send money home reliably. I stayed because... He paused. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure. Inertia, partly. And partly because there was something about the place that felt like it mattered. The infrastructure, the region, what it provides. He glanced at her. That sounds more principled than it actually was in practice. Most things do, she said. He almost laughed. Are you going to stay? She asked. Not professionally, personally. He thought about it. Ask me in a month, he said. when things have settled. He paused. Are you? She looked at the camera feeds. The compound quiet Core's team running the night rotation with the smooth efficiency of a unit that trained together. Benedict in the Eastern Station doing his last 2 hours before handoff. Ask me in a month, she said. Farron called at 7 a.m. The account freeze held overnight, she said. 3 of the shell company accounts attempted to move funds within 90 minutes of the freeze order. They were blocked. We're now tracing the attempted destinations, which is giving us a significantly more complete picture of the network's financial structure than we had 24 hours ago. Vand? His legal counsel submitted a formal response at 11 p.m. He's maintaining the unauthorized use position, but the compliance audit record is harder to explain away. Our forensic accountants found 2 sets of modifications, the original audit findings and the revised findings that were filed. The modification metadata traces to a device registered to a Northstar internal network address. A pause. His office. Mara closed her eyes briefly. That's direct. Yes, it won't be simple. His legal team is experienced and they'll fight the metadata attribution. But it establishes a basis that the unauthorized use defense can't easily survive. Another pause. We've also identified a second individual with Northstar connections who appears to have facilitated the intelligence gathering on you specifically. She'd been waiting for this. Tell me. A former Northstar security director, separated from the company 14 months ago. Before leaving, he conducted what appears to have been an unauthorized personnel file access on several contracted individuals, including you. The access was logged, but the log was misfiled. It didn't surface in standard review. Farron's voice was careful, precise. The file he accessed included your service record summary. It was sufficient to establish your background and the general nature of your prior deployment history. Mara sat with that for a moment, 14 months ago. The access had happened before she was even under consideration for the Northstar contract, which meant it wasn't targeted. It was a sweep. Pulling files on anyone connected to the organization who had a military or intelligence background, building a database of people who might eventually become relevant. He sold it, she said. We believe so. The financial trace suggests payments consistent with that kind of information brokerage. A pause. I want to be direct with you about something, Mrs. Voss. Go ahead. The nature of your service record, what it contains, is going to become relevant in the formal investigation. Not publicly, but within the evidentiary chain. Several of the people involved in prosecuting this case will need context that goes beyond what you've described in your statement. She paused. I want to make sure you're prepared for that. Mara looked out the window. The morning was clear, the valley below the facility green and still, the mountains sharp against a sky that had come up cloudless. I've been prepared for it for 3 years, she said. I just wasn't doing anything about it. And now? Now I'm doing something about it. A short silence. The restricted file access was approved this morning, Farron said. I read it. Mara waited. Farron paused, and it was the pause of someone choosing words carefully, not for legal reasons, but for human ones. It explained some things. About why you left, and about why the people who researched you thought that particular pressure point would be effective. Did it work? Mara asked, as context for the case. Yes. A pause. For what it's worth, the decision you made to leave when you did. It's documented in the file. The circumstances. Another pause. I've reviewed a lot of personnel records. The people who leave when they should are rarer than the ones who stay too long. Mara didn't say anything for a moment. Thank you, she said. She meant it. We'll need you available for formal testimony when the case moves forward, Farron said, back to professional register. It could be several months. I'll be available. She hung up and sat with the phone in her hand for a while. Rainer Vand was formally suspended from the Northstar board 11 days later, pending the outcome of the oversight investigation. The announcement was internal first, then public a carefully worded statement about ongoing governance review. that said very little and implied considerably more. The financial press, this notice the story ran in 3 regional business publications within 48 hours, each one reporting a slightly different version of the same facts, none of them knowing about the shell companies or the facility in Valdora or the maintenance contractor invoices that had started the whole unraveling. Gasty, professionally, Mara read the coverage on her phone while sitting in the operations room, which by that point had been upgraded with a new comms board that actually worked reliably, installed by a technician who had shown up on schedule and done the job completely and left without incident. She'd been watching that kind of thing, the small normalizations, the maintenance requests that were submitted and fulfilled, the systems that ran correctly because the quiet corruption that had been degrading them was no longer operating. The former security director who had accessed and sold her file was arrested 9 days after the Vand suspension. The charges were filed in 2 jurisdictions simultaneously. His name appeared in none of the public coverage, which Farron had explained was standard for evidentiary reasons, and which Mara was privately grateful for, because his name appearing publicly would have required her name to appear alongside it. And she wasn't ready for that. Maybe she would be eventually. She hadn't decided yet. Vektara's network didn't collapse all at once. It contracted. The account freezes held and were extended as the forensic accounting deepened, and the operational money that had been funding the pressure campaign on the facility dried up over the course of 3 weeks. There were 2 more incidents in that period, a vehicle that stopped on the Ridge Road for 40 minutes before leaving, and a threatening phone call to Osei's personal number that was immediately reported to Farron and traced to a prepaid phone purchased in a city 400 kilometers away. Neither escalated. The weight of the network's attention shifted, as it always did when the financial foundation started giving way toward self-preservation rather than expansion. By the end of the 3rd week, the facility had gone 7 consecutive days, without a sensor alert beyond routine wildlife. Core's team reduced their footprint on day 22, keeping 2 people on rotation and withdrawing the other 4. On day 22, Core came to the operations room before her team departed and stood at the camera feeds for a moment. "Your rotation schedule is solid," she said. "The protocol changes are sustainable. The team knows what they're doing." "They always did," Mara said. "They just didn't have the conditions to do it in." Core looked at her. "Hulse wants to talk to you about a permanent position. International Security Division, full oversight authority." "I know," he called. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd think about it." Core nodded. She picked up her bag. At the door, she stopped. "The frequency," she said. "The one from the probe equipment. That was good work. It was a guess. It was an educated guess made at 2 a.m. after a 30-hour shift." She met Mara's eyes. "That's not a guess. That's experience." She paused. "For whatever it's worth, from my assessment of what happened here, you didn't just defend this facility. You changed its condition. Those are different things." She left. Mara stood at the camera feeds and thought about the difference between those things. She called her sister on a Thursday afternoon, standing on the eastern side of the compound where the fence was now properly repaired, and the camera above it glowed steady green in the afternoon light. "You said you'd call when you got there," her sister said. "I know. I got busy. Are you all right?" Mara looked at the valley below. The river was visible from this angle, a silver thread in the green of the valley floor, moving in the unhurried way of something that had been moving the same for 10,000 years and wasn't particularly concerned with what was happening on the slope above it. "Yes," she said. "I'm all right." "That's different from how you usually say it." "What do you mean?" Usually when you say you're all right, it sounds like a status report. Right now it sounds like..." Her sister paused. "Like you mean it." Mara was quiet for a moment. "I think I might," she said. Her sister, who had known her for 38 years and had learned which silences to sit in and which to fill, sat in this one. "Are you coming home?" she asked eventually. "Not yet." There's still work here. She looked at the camera. But she stopped, started again. I've been thinking about what I'm doing. Not just here, what I want it to be. And I think I've been trying to be smaller than I am, she said, for the last 3 years. Trying to fit into something quieter, because I thought that was what recovery looked like. Is it? I don't know what recovery looks like, she said honestly. But I think being good at something and using it, I think that might be part of it. Not all of it, but part. Her sister was quiet for a moment. Mom used to say, you were born looking for the hardest thing in the room to fix. Mom said that? She said it every time you took apart something that wasn't broken to see if you could put it back together better. A pause. She wasn't wrong. Mara looked at the valley for a while longer. I'll call more often, she said. I'll believe that when it happens. Fair. She hung up and stood in the afternoon light for a few more minutes. The wind was coming up from the valley cool, carrying the smell of pine and something that might have been rain moving in from the west. She could hear the facility behind her. It sounds familiar now. The generator, the equipment, hum, the radio crackle from Tomas on the gate, doing his afternoon check. She turned around and walked back in. Benedict found her in the equipment shed 2 days later, where she was doing an inventory of the sensor relay components. A tedious job she'd taken on, partly because it needed doing, and partly because tedious physical tasks were underrated as a way to let the mind work through things that didn't resolve cleanly by being looked at directly. He stood in the doorway for a moment. You're leaving, he said. Not a question. Not yet, she said, without looking up. 3 more weeks, probably, until Northstar confirms the permanent security framework. But eventually, yes. He was quiet. She could hear him thinking. What happens to this place? He asked. It keeps running. She set down a relay component and looked at him. The rotation schedule holds, the protocols hold. Northstar is hiring 2 additional guards. I've been reviewing the candidate files, and I'll make recommendations before I go. The cameras are live. The generator is fueled. The vendor contracts have been audited, and the compromised technician has been dropped. She paused. The facility is what it should have been from the beginning. It runs without depending on any one person to hold it together. He nodded slowly, including you, especially me. He leaned against the doorframe. He had the thoughtful quality he always had, but there was something slightly different about it. Todayless, watchful, more settled, like a piece of furniture that had been moved to the right place and stopped needing adjustment. I've been thinking about my uncle's friend, he said. Vasek. She waited. I think I understand now what happened to him. Not the specifics, but the shape of it. He looked at his hands briefly. He came here alone, and the systems were failing, and the threat was real, and there was nobody to share the weight with. And it wasn't that he was weak. It was that no one person is strong enough to carry all of that indefinitely. No, she agreed. You came here alone too, he said. But you didn't try to carry it alone. She looked at him. He was 26 and had the instincts of someone significantly older and had earned, in the last 3 weeks, the right to say what he was saying. I've learned that lesson before, she said, the hard way, more than once. The military, and before, and after. She picked up the relay component again. It's the kind of lesson that doesn't stay learned. You have to keep learning it. He was quiet for a moment. Northstar offered me a position on the permanent security team. Senior guard, lead rotation. OC told me this morning. I recommended you, she said, in case that wasn't obvious. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, but the thing that arrived alongside something you'd hoped for, but hadn't been certain of. Thank you, he said. You earned it. What I recommended was just what I observed. He pushed off the doorframe. He was almost out of the shed when he stopped, the same way he'd stopped at the operations room door weeks ago, and turned back. Ms. Voss, he said, what you said to them, on the speaker frequency, about the documentation, the financial freeze, the investigation. He paused. Did you know it would work, or were you hoping? She thought about it, honestly. Hoping, she said, with a reasonable evidential basis for the hope. He nodded. Absorbed that. Okay, he said, and left. She went back to the inventory. Rainer Vant was formally charged 6 weeks after the account. Freeze 3 counts of financial facilitation of criminal activity, 2 counts of evidence, tampering relating to the compliance audit, and 1 count that Farron described in her call to Mara as the kind of charge that took time to build, but was the most serious of all, relating to his knowing facilitation of the pressure campaign that had resulted in harm to Vasek and the other consultants. Vasek's testimony, Farron said. He agreed to provide it. Mara stopped what she was doing. How is he? She asked. A pause. Better than he was, Farron said carefully. Not what he was, but better. Another pause. He asked about the person who was at the facility now. I told him there was a security consultant who had stabilized the situation. Did you tell him my name? I asked him first if he wanted to know. A pause. He said yes. Mara sat with that for a moment. Vasek, who had lasted 11 days in a place that had been deliberately designed to break people, who had come back changed in the way that specific kinds of damage changed people, who had said yes to testifying, who had asked to know her name. Tell him she stopped, started again. Tell him the facility is running well. The people there are good. Tell him what happened. There wasn't a failure of his capability. It was a design system that was meant to defeat any individual who tried to stand against it alone. I'll tell him, Farron said. After the call, Mara sat at the operations table for a while. The facility hummed around her. The cameras showed the compound in the long light of late afternoon, gold and clear, every angle covered, every sensor live. She thought about designed systems, about the particular cruelty of constructing an environment intended not to defeat someone directly but to erode them, to make the work impossible and the isolation complete and the resources inadequate, until the person simply ran out. She had seen it done in other contexts, in other places, with different tools. The principle was the same. It worked on most people. It hadn't worked here, not because she was exceptional. She was capable, but exceptional was a word that covered too much and explained too little. It hadn't worked because she'd refused the isolation, because she'd looked at 7 people who were scared and tired and had been quietly failed by their organization and decided that the answer wasn't to replace them, but to change the conditions they were operating in. Because she'd fixed the cameras and fueled the generator and rewritten the rotation schedule and sent the documentation out before the attack came rather than after. So that by the time Vektara arrived in force, the design system intended to defeat her had been replaced with a different design system entirely, one that worked. She left on a Tuesday morning, which felt right in a way she couldn't entirely explain. The week beginning again, the same day she'd been running in Briarwood Heights when the black sedan started following her, some kind of loop completed even if incompletely. Ose drove her to the transit hub in Rannoch. They didn't talk much on the way down. The valley road was winding, and Ose was a careful driver, and there wasn't much left that needed to be said. At the hub, he pulled up to the departure entrance and put the vehicle in park, and sat for a moment. The oversight investigator, he said. Farron. She called me yesterday. Mara looked at him. She wanted a statement from facility personnel about the conditions in the months before you arrived. I gave her one. He looked at the transit hub entrance. I told her about the camera repair requests that never got fulfilled, the fuel delays, the maintenance contractor who signed off on work that wasn't done. He paused. I told her that we knew something was wrong, but we didn't have the standing or the documentation to force anyone to take it seriously. That's accurate. I also told her he stopped, started again. I told her that when you arrived, the thing that changed first wasn't the cameras or the generator or the rotation. It was that someone was willing to take what we already knew and treat it as real. He looked at her. We knew. We just didn't have anyone who would act on what we knew. She held his gaze. You had that, he said, from the first night. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said the true thing. You gave me what I needed to work with. All of you did. He nodded once, looked at the entrance again. My wife wants to visit, he said. She's never been to Valdora. It's worth seeing. That's what I told her. He paused. I also told her I'm staying, at least another year. She felt something warm and unperformed move through her. Good, she said. They need you. She got out of the vehicle. She grabbed her bag from the back seat. She was almost to the entrance when he called after her. Ms. Voss. She turned. He was leaning out the window. In the morning light, he looked tired and solid, like someone who had made peace with the life he was actually living, rather than the one he'd planned. Halst's offer, he said. The international division. What about it? Take it, he said simply. This is what you do. She looked at him for a moment. I'll think about it, she said. He drove away. She stood in front of the transit hub entrance with her bag over one shoulder and the morning moving around her travelers, vehicles, the ordinary chaos of a place that existed to move people from where they were to somewhere else. She thought about what Osi had said. This is what you do. She thought about her sister, born looking for the hardest thing in the room to fix. She thought about Benedict, who had dragged a cot into the relay station and slept 4 hours and woken up and done his job. About Tomas, who had fixed cameras in the dark without asking why it mattered. About Daku, who had started the assignment resenting her presence and ended it with a handshake that communicated more than he probably intended. About Priya, who had kept Northstar on the phone through 2 separate approach events without losing her composure once. She thought about Vasek, who had said yes to testifying and yes to knowing her name. She thought, about 11 years of work that had stayed with her in ways she'd spent 3 years trying to metabolize by pretending to be someone who hadn't done it. About the fact that the metabolizing, such as it was, had happened anyway, not in the quiet of ordinary life, not in the grocery runs and morning runs and inadequate quarterly briefings, but here, in a facility on a slope above a valley in Valdora, with 7 people who needed someone to treat what they knew as real. She pulled out her phone. She found Hal's number. She called it. He answered on the second ring, which she was beginning to understand was just how he operated. Ms. Voss, he said. The international division offer, she said. I have conditions. A pause that she could feel him smiling through. Of course you do. Full operational authority on security assessment and implementation. No board review on personnel decisions below director level. A budget line for training, not just staffing, training. Because the problem at every facility like this one isn't that the people are wrong, it's that nobody invests in making them capable. She paused. And I want Benedict Olar on my team. He's at the Valdora facility right now. He's 26, and he's the best tactical instinct I've worked with since. She stopped. Since a while. Done, Halst said, without hesitating on any of it. She'd expected negotiation. The absence of it told her something. You already knew I'd call, she said. I hoped. A pause. Osi called me 20 minutes ago and told me you were at the transit hub. She almost just laughed. Of course he did, he also said. And I want to be accurate here. That if I didn't give you everything you asked for, he'd submit a formal complaint about the competence of Northstar's executive decision-making. This time she did laugh. It came out a little rough, a little surprised by itself. The laugh of someone who hadn't done it in a while and found the mechanism still worked. Tell him I said thank you, she said. Tell him yourself, Halst said. You'll be working with the Valdora facility in an oversight capacity for the next 3 months as part of the transition. She picked up her bag and walked into the transit hub. Send me the paperwork, she said. She didn't become a different person. That was the thing she understood most clearly in the weeks that followed. The work, the investigation, the 3 weeks in Valdora hadn't changed who she was. They'd changed what she was willing to do with it. The past was still there. The 11 years were still there. The things that had accumulated in the spaces between deployments, the specific weight of decisions made in places that didn't exist in any official record. None of that was resolved or erased or neatly packaged into something manageable. It was just hers, fully without the pretense of distance. Vektara's network, as Farin had predicted, didn't collapse in a single event. It contracted over months' financial pressure from the account freezes, legal pressure from the charges against Vand and the former security director, operational pressure from the hardened facilities that had stopped behaving like soft targets. 3 of its senior operatives were arrested in separate jurisdictions over a 4-month period. Its leadership went quiet in the way that organizations went quiet when the architecture of protection that had kept them operational was no longer reliable. The facilities that had been considered indefensible became, over time, simply facilities monitored, staffed appropriately, maintained on schedule by contractors, whose work was verified and whose invoices were audited. Not perfect. Nothing was perfect, but functional, and more importantly, honest about what needed fixing and willing to fix it. Benedict joined her team 8 weeks after she left Valdora. He showed up at the first briefing with the same watchful stillness he'd had in the operations room, listened to everything, asked 2 questions that were better than most of the observations other people offered, and became, over time, the person she trusted most to see what she missed. He was good at it. She told him so once, directly, because she'd learned that not saying the true thing, because it was uncomfortable to say, was a habit that cost more than it saved. He said, "I learned it from watching you." She said, "You already had it. You just had somewhere to use it." Neither of them was entirely right. Both of them were partly right. That was usually how it went. She called her sister more often than before. Not as often as she'd promised. She was realistic about herself, but more. The calls were different than they'd been. Less status report, more conversation. Her sister noticed, but didn't comment, which was the most generous thing she could have done. A year after Birch Lane, on a Tuesday evening, that felt like an ordinary Tuesday evening and nothing like an anniversary, Mara went for a run. Different city, different street, different shoes. The left lace on the Sauconys had finally broken, and she'd replaced them. The route was unfamiliar, which was deliberate. She'd been in this city for 3 weeks and hadn't yet found the run that felt right, the one that fit the particular geography of the place. She ran without earbuds, the way she always did, her attention moving the way it always moved, noting, cataloging, the ambient awareness that had never really turned off and that she'd stopped trying to turn off. A car idling, a group outside a restaurant, a woman walking a dog in the direction of the park. None of it was a threat. She ran until her lungs were working, and her legs were working, and the evening was coming down gold and cool around her, and somewhere in the second mile, she stopped thinking about anything specific and just ran. She was good at this. At the work, yes. At the assessment and the protocols and the documentation and the 3 a.m. decisions made on incomplete information. But also at being present in a body that had carried a great deal and still moved well, at the uncomplicated physical fact of running through an ordinary evening on an ordinary street in a world that contained both terrible things and people willing to stand between those things and the people they threatened. She had spent 3 years trying to be smaller than she was. She was done with that. The evening opened around her, and she ran into it. And the city lights came on one by one, the way they always did, and she felt, not fixed, not healed, not resolved into something clean and simple, but purposeful, in the way that a well-made thing feels purposeful when it's doing what it was made to do. That was enough. That was, it turned out, exactly enough. The people who underestimate you are not always wrong about your past. They are always wrong about your future.